August 2024. A summer that seemed destined to close in quiet rhythm suddenly collapsed in just 72 hours into a cascade of events so implausible that, if written into a screenplay, an editor would strike it out as too absurd. But this time, the script did not belong to imagination. It belonged to reality. And that reality struck humanity like a multi-layered storm, inaugurating a week of history that may forever be called by one word: chaos. It began with the sky. Space observatories reported a massive solar storm hurtling directly toward Earth. Warnings were issued, yet no one anticipated the fury it would unleash. On the night of August 18, auroras erupted not only over the Arctic and Antarctic, but also piled as far south as the Mediterranean. Curtains of emerald and violet light tore across the heavens, like an electronic veil ripped apart. Citizens of Paris, Rome, even Cairo, lifted their faces in dread as familiar darkness was replaced by a haunted masquerade of light. Within hours, chunks of Europe's power grid toppled like dominoes. Planes made emergency landings. Satellites spun out of control, wobbling like drunken dancers. The internet stuttered, financial markets convulsed, and the fragile dependence of civilization on electronics was laid bare for all to see. Before the world could regain its bearings, the ground itself convulsed. At dawn on the 19th, a 7.4 magnitude earthquake ripped through central Turkey. Ancient cities crumbled into rubble in mere seconds. Live television captured the collapse of towering concrete buildings as if they were sand, while people fled in terror, their screams shattering the night. Social media flooded with shaky videos, lights cutting across darkness, children clinging to their parents as the world betrayed its promise of solidity. Those images spread faster than the seismic waves themselves, making millions across the globe feel the tremors beneath their own feet. And as if that were not enough, the cosmos delivered a third strike. On the 20th, telescopes in Chile and Hawaii simultaneously recorded a sudden outburst in the constellation Orion. A faint star flared violently, transforming into a nova visible to the naked eye. That light was not merely a message from thousands of years past. In this moment, it appeared as a chilling reminder. The universe can erupt at any time, and humankind is nothing but powerless spectators as the stage quakes before their eyes. Astronomers exclaimed that such an opportunity was rare beyond measure, but the crowds heard no joy in their voices. All they felt was dread. If a distant star could explode into such fury, could our own sun one day do the same? As headlines of solar storms, earthquakes, and novae spread, another figure emerged from the chaos: 3I Atlas. Detected only months earlier, this mysterious interstellar object had already commanded scientists' anxious attention. But cruelly, its trajectory cut across Earth's skies just as the sun raged, just as the ground fractured, just as Orion burst into flame. A frozen, indifferent wanderer between stars suddenly became the center of human unease. Whispers began to rise. Was this mere coincidence? Or was the universe sending a message? Scientists rushed to reassure that solar storms were cyclical, that earthquakes were natural energy releases, that Orion's nova was simply astrophysics. Yet the trembling in their live reports betrayed them. They, too, were stunned. They, too, were afraid. And when the voice of science no longer felt like an unshakable wall, doubt spread like floodwater. Online forums ignited with fevered speculation. Some claimed it was a signal from a distant civilization. Others that Earth was stepping into an age of apocalypse. All of it tangled together, thickening the veil of panic that smothered the planet. In those brief 3 days, humanity glimpsed the fragility of modern civilization. All it took was a sky in revolt and a ground splitting open, and what we thought, eternal electricity, the internet, towering cities of steel and stone crumbled like children's toys. The world trembled not only with fear, but with awe, with the sense that some unseen hand was arranging events into a perfect storm of crises. And within that chaos, one name echoed like a cipher: 3I Atlas. No one knew what it meant. Only this was certain: when everything erupts within a single week, belief in coincidence suddenly feels like the rarest luxury of all. As the world entered the 4th day of chaos, no one still believed these were just isolated natural events. What once felt like a coincidence had turned into an obsession, and that obsession quickly spread like a global contagion, the contagion of fear. In New York, long lines of people crowded outside grocery stores, fighting over bottles of water and cans of food. On television, footage from Turkey replayed endlessly. A child covered in concrete dust being pulled from the rubble, eyes wide open, staring into the camera as if to ask, "What is happening to our world?" Those eyes haunted viewers everywhere, transforming a local disaster into a wound shared by all humanity. Across Europe, a power grid already weakened by the solar storm continued to collapse, leaving cities swallowed in darkness. And in that darkness, wild theories multiplied. Some said the Orion Nova was no accident, that it was the eye of the universe gazing down at Earth. Posts spread at lightning speed. Atlas is not a celestial body, it is a signal. Those words appeared on phones in Madrid, computers in Berlin, and forums in Moscow. Together, they wove a dense web of rumor, a haze so thick it drowned out every attempt by scientists to reassure a voice crying into the wind. In Asia, anxiety mutated into drastic action. Several governments declared states of emergency, deploying armies to guard broadcast towers and power plants. The sight of soldiers standing watch beneath skies aflame with auroras became a surreal symbol, humanity defending itself against an enemy it could not even name. In Tokyo, crowds gathered silently around temples to pray. In India, thousands waded into the Ganges, submerging themselves in the cold river, believing it was the only way to wash away the fear closing in. But perhaps the most terrifying force was not the solar storm, not the earthquake, not even Orion's burst of light. The most terrifying was the fracture of trust. Trust in science wavered as researchers gave trembling answers. "We don't know yet." Trust in governments collapsed as official speeches were drowned by shouts from the crowd. "What are you hiding?" Trust in each other vanished as misinformation seeped into every corner, splintering communities into frenzied factions. Amid the chaos, 3i Atlas became the focal point of whispers. No one knew what it truly was beyond a block of ice and rock from a distant star system, yet fear painted it with mythic shape. Online, doctored images of Atlas spread like wildfire. A dark sphere with a blazing red tail, like a demon's eye hanging in space. People no longer call it 3i Atlas. They gave it another name, the Omen. And once a celestial object is called the Omen, it ceases to be a subject of science. It becomes the embodiment of a collective crisis. Headlines screamed, "Atlas and the Apocalypse. Is this the beginning?" Television programs invited prophets and self-proclaimed psychics to predict the future. Meanwhile, real scientists sat silently before their screens, knowing any rational explanation would be drowned in the roar of fear. Protests erupted. People took to the streets, raising banners that read, "We want the truth." Some shouted that governments were hiding information about Atlas, that it was not a natural object but a machine sent by alien intelligence. In great squares, extremist groups smashed windows, burned books of science, treating them as symbols of betrayal. Amid this turmoil, a simple yet terrifying question echoed. If science has no answers, what is left for us to cling to? The planet's emotions surged like relentless waves. Awe at the relentless phenomena, despair as every system trembled, curiosity laced with suspicion about deeper meaning, and finally, a fear that seeped into the marrow of daily life. And all of it circled back to a single center, a cold interstellar wanderer named 3i Atlas, drifting silently, unmoved, while all of humanity quaked before its shadow. As 3i Atlas drifted deeper into the solar system, the crisis on Earth had reached its boiling point. What had once been considered the solid foundations of the modern world. Energy, information, markets fell one by one like lines of dominoes. The solar storm had not yet subsided when another storm rose, the storm of human chaos itself. Global positioning systems began to flicker. Commercial aircraft lost their signals, forcing pilots to navigate back to airports using paper maps, as if the entire aviation industry had been dragged back decades. Shipping lanes clogged as cargo vessels were unable to dock, their navigation systems scrambled. Millions of containers filled with food, fuel, and medicine sat stranded offshore, turning the global supply chain into a maze of paralysis. On land, markets stood empty, supermarkets were stripped bare, and millions of people began to feel the quiet approach of hunger seeping in. The media, once the lifeblood of the digital age, fractured into fissures. Social networks were no longer places of connection but battlefields of misinformation. Each photo of eerie auroras came captioned as the light of the apocalypse. Every minor tremor anywhere on Earth was labeled a harbinger of global collapse. Algorithms shoved fear-laden stories to the top of feeds, stoking a fire that could not be quenched. People shared, debated, argued, and ultimately lost the ability to distinguish between truth and illusion. In this atmosphere, the image of 3I Atlas swelled into obsession. A faint celestial body once seen only through telescopes now appeared on the front page of every paper, from the Washington Post to the smallest tabloids. Simulated graphics of its orbit aired on endless loops, a red arc sketched dangerously close to Earth like a suspended blade. With each passing day, it drew nearer, and with each passing day, the human heartbeat quickened, as if its icy silence were slowly suffocating the planet's breath. Governments scrambled to respond, but in their haste revealed their own fragility. The United Nations convened an emergency summit, which quickly devolved into a stage for leaders to hurl accusations. The United States accused China of concealing astronomical data. Europe condemned Russia for exploiting the crisis to manipulate information. Smaller nations shouted that they had been abandoned altogether. It unfolded like a chaotic play performed before a global audience desperate for explanation. While the superpowers bickered, religion and belief systems rushed to fill the vacuum of trust. A flood of new sects emerged, proclaiming Atlas as the messenger of a distant civilization, or worse, the judgment against humanity. Crowds poured into cathedrals, mosques, and temples. Self-proclaimed prophets stood in public squares, shouting that they had dreamed of Atlas whispering secrets into their sleep. The masses listened and believed, for in chaos, people cling to anything that promises meaning. Yet alongside this fever of superstition came an extreme suspicion. Groups calling themselves the Awakened stormed the streets, smashing the headquarters of research institutes, screaming that science had betrayed humankind. They insisted that 3I Atlas was no natural object but a surveillance device of some higher unseen power. Cameras, satellites, observatories all became targets of destruction, as if shattering lenses could erase the nightmare looming overhead. Within days, Earth resembled a feverish body. Power cut in fits and starts, supply lines severed, trust fractured, and human reason faltered. Quietly, scientists warned, if we lose the ability to observe Atlas, we will have blinded ourselves just as an interstellar traveler crosses our neighborhood. But their voices were faint, drowned in the ocean of fear, suspicion, and rage. And then, as though the universe wished to pour oil on the already raging fire, telescopes confirmed. 3I Atlas was about to enter a region where it could be seen with the naked eye under dark skies. This meant that in a matter of days, anyone could look up and see it not a dim blur in data, but a true presence in the heavens. That announcement spread like wildfire. For scientists, it was a golden opportunity for study, but for the masses, it was confirmation that every fear had now taken visible shape. And when fear takes shape, it transforms into a full-blown crisis. The night of the 24th of August 2024, billions of eyes turned toward the sky, and there, against the canvas of darkness, 3I Atlas appeared, not as a sterile number in a dataset, not as a faint smudge on a telescope's image, but as a streak of light carving across the heavens like a cold scar. In that instant, vague fear took on shape. It hovered above humanity, silent yet haunting, like a distant judge observing us without the need to speak. Public squares across the world overflowed with people. In New York, giant LED screens broadcast live images of Atlas, and each time the street glimmered, the crowd held its breath. In Istanbul, survivors of the earthquake fell prostrate, weeping and praying. In Rio de Janeiro, throngs danced as though celebrating the final party of civilization. Earth became a vast stage where humanity performed every emotion at once: fear, doubt, hope, exhilaration, and despair. The media called it the Night of Destiny. News channels ran 24 hours straight, Atlas dominating every screen. Experts cycled in and out of studios, yet all repeated the same refrain: we don't know. That answer, rather than soothing, deepened the wound of trust. If the brightest minds could not explain, then who could? Into that void, prophecies, mystical writings, and conspiracy theories sprouted like weeds bursting through cracks in reason. But perhaps the most frightening thing was not the fake news or the rumors, it was the silence of the universe itself. 3I Atlas emitted no sound, sent no signal, and simply drifted on. Its silence reverberated like a scream inside the human mind. For we do not fear the noisy, but the inexplicable silence. Silence makes every hypothesis possible, And in that boundless sea of possibilities, imagination spawns nightmares greater than any truth. Governments imposed curfews, but could not stem the tide of gatherings. People filled the streets, faces lifted skyward, shouting or sobbing. Some cities became oceans of fire as protests ignited into riots. Government buildings were smashed, scientific libraries set ablaze. Humanity, in its collective crisis, destroyed its own achievements, and all unfolded under the cold gaze of Atlas, as if it were recording each moment of collapse in a civilization that had once called itself intelligent. Within the scientific world, the atmosphere was scarcely better. Laboratories once buzzing with the clatter of keyboards now stood hushed, broken only by the steady hum of machines. Researchers sat before their screens, eyes hollow. They knew they stood at a historic threshold of discovery, yet felt themselves unbearably small. Some broke down in tears live on television, confessing that the knowledge they had trusted all their lives was no longer enough to explain what was unfolding. And so the final emotion to blanket the planet was not merely crisis, it was existential awe. Humanity suddenly saw itself as nothing more than dust motes beneath a mysterious sky, forced to confront a question as old as time. Who are we in this universe? That question echoed in darkened rooms, in sleepless nights, in every upward glance toward Atlas. The night of August 24 closed, but its echo would never fade. Not because solar storms had toppled power grids, not because earthquakes had leveled cities, not because Orion's Nova blazed across the heavens, but because 3I Atlas had become a colossal mirror, reflecting the fragility of human civilization. When all that is familiar collapses, we discover that it is our very existence that must be questioned anew. And that question, no one yet holds the answer. By late August 2024, the world was still trembling from the aftershocks of the solar storm, the earthquake, and the haunting appearance of 3I Atlas. Humanity thought chaos had already peaked, but once more, the sky tore through every boundary. On the night of August 27, within the constellation Orion, a single point of light surged forth, its brightness climbing exponentially, as if an ancient furnace had reignited after thousands of years of slumber. In just a few hours, it blazed with an intensity visible to the naked eye. And when people lifted their gaze, the first sensation was not joy at discovery, but astonishment so sharp it stole their breath. Orion had always been the constellation of the immortal hunter. Yet now, upon the hunter's shoulder, a star had erupted its light, crossing thousands of years of space to touch us in this exact moment. It was not merely an astronomical event. It felt like a whisper from the universe itself. I have waited for you long enough. The white-blue radiance spilled across the sky, brighter than the stars people thought they knew, and for the first time in many lives, they felt reverence for the heavens, not just admiration. Telescopes around the globe swung toward Orion. Data poured in, temperatures soaring to millions of degrees, plasma hurled outward at thousands of kilometers per second. Electrons and protons accelerated nearly to light speed, spewing X-rays and gamma radiation. Scientists called it a natural particle accelerator, far surpassing anything on Earth. But for the public, the numbers meant nothing. All they saw was a blazing sky and felt their hearts race, as though the universe itself was bearing its explosive heart. Just 2 days later, with Orion's Nova still burning, another shock arrived. This time from the constellation Lyra, the celestial lyre. A dim star flared, then detonated. Light from Lyra's Nova washed across the northern sky, paired with Orion, creating a spectacle rarely seen. 2 stellar explosions at once, a cosmic duet performed for humankind alone. The crowds named it the Symphony of Destruction, though others called it the Triumph of Light. For though it carried the shape of ruin, within its glow was something like a festival of the cosmos, one we had no choice but to attend. On social media, images of the radiant skies spread as though a new storm had been unleashed. The hashtag number, Orion Lyra Nova, soared to the top of global trends. Artists declared it a sacred moment, where music and science met, yet beneath the thrill lay a hidden dread. If the universe could unleash 2 such blasts in unison, then where did we, the small, fragile creatures of Earth, stand in the vast order of it all? For centuries, humanity had looked up and found comfort in the constancy of the constellations. But that night, Orion and Lyra betrayed that stability. They erupted, they burned, and they planted within us a raw truth. The universe is not silent, It is a stage where great explosions play out every day, and only rarely are we chosen as witnesses, and once chosen, we cannot turn away. To understand what had just unfolded in the skies of Orion and Lyra, we must look into the dark hearts of dead stars. A nova is not a final explosion, it is a violent play of rebirth, where a white dwarf, the leftover core of a once radiant star, returns from death to consume its companion. Astronomers call it stellar cannibalism, the devouring between stars. Imagine a sphere no larger than Earth, yet weighing as much as the Sunday. On its surface, gravity is so crushing that a single teaspoon of matter would weigh as much as an entire Himalayan mountain. This is the white dwarf, a stellar corpse, silent and hungry. It orbits a more ordinary star, an unsuspecting companion. Slowly, layer by layer, delicate streams of hydrogen are stripped from the living star, drifting through space like glowing ribbons before falling onto the corpse's deadly surface. At first, nothing happens, but the gas builds up, compressed under insane gravitational pressure. Temperature climbs, pressure soars, and then, in an instant, nature flips the detonator. Runaway thermonuclear fusion erupts, not the steady burning of our sun's core, but a colossal hydrogen bomb, releasing energy equivalent to millions of Earths detonating at once. Within seconds, its brightness surges tens of thousands of times, transforming an anonymous star into a torch visible to the naked eye on Earth. If described in human terms, the image is of a dead heart reigniting in fire, pounding so violently it shakes an entire galaxy. Protons and electrons are hurled off its surface, accelerated to near-light speed, cascading into cosmic torrents that blast outward in all directions. Satellites orbiting Earth recorded showers of X-ray and gamma photons, the fingerprints of matter colliding at the ultimate thresholds of physics. The terrifying part is this: the explosion does not kill the white dwarf. It merely strips away the layer it had devoured. Afterward, the star waits. It feeds again, it builds again, it waits again, until it explodes once more. Orion's nova and Lyra's nova may be just two among dozens, even hundreds of times they have been reborn, detonating like immortal predators, scattering the cosmos with thunderous bursts of light every cycle. This is why astronomers call them natural accelerators. In a fleeting instant, they accomplish what the greatest human laboratories cannot even dream: accelerating particles to near the speed of light, twisting magnetic fields, and creating temperatures of tens of millions of degrees. They are not simply spectacles of beauty, they are laboratories of death, where physics is written in its most extreme language. Consider this: the light we witnessed in late August 2024 had, in fact, left Orion and Lyra thousands of years ago, when ancient civilizations on Earth were still stumbling through the construction of pyramids, meaning the explosion did not happen for us. It happened long before we could even write history. Yet the universe arranged for that light to arrive now, at the very moment humanity was reeling from solar storms, earthquakes, and the looming shadow of 3I Atlas. And that coincidence, though science may label it random, still chills us. Sometimes, coincidence is but another form of destiny. In those moments when Orion and Lyra erupted, we did not merely witness an astronomical event, we glimpsed the naked truth of the cosmos. It consumes, it explodes, it blazes, and then falls silent, and it has done so for billions of years without needing our eyes. But once in a lifetime, we looked up, caught that moment, and understood just how small we truly are. The moment Orion and Lyra erupted together, the scientific world staggered. Astronomy centers from Hawaii to Chile to South Africa swung their telescopes in unison, fighting for every second of data. NASA launched a live broadcast, allowing millions to watch the light curves of the two novae surge upward like screams tearing across the universe. The European Space Agency released the first spectral images, showing emission lines of hydrogen, helium, and even heavy elements ripped from the star's cores, hurled into space like fireworks of death. Scientists, usually fluent only in the cold language of data, could no longer contain their emotions. An astronomer in Chile exclaimed at a press conference, "This is the moment every generation of science has dreamed of. We are not just watching light, we are watching the universe rewrite its own music." The words spread like wildfire, quoted in millions of articles and tweets, fueling the blaze of global exhilaration. Meanwhile, people poured into the streets, heads tilted toward the heavens, eyes shimmering not only from the novas, but from the sheer wonder of living through them. In Buenos Aires, Guitars rang out in public squares as people played and pointed skyward, calling the scene a harmony between light and shadow. In Rome, church bells tolled not for a religious service, but to celebrate the detonation of two stars, as if the universe had baptized all of humanity in light. And of course, social media turned the event into a storm of emotion. Millions of skyward photos flooded timelines, paired with captions, "I saw the universe breathe. Tonight, we are stardust trembling." Hashtags number Twin Nova and number Orion Lyra exploded, eclipsing every political or sporting event. Never before had humankind divided by borders, religions, and ideologies looked in the same direction and spoken the same word, awe. But awe was inseparable from fear, for as Orion and Lyra burned, a chilling truth resurfaced. Every element that makes up our bodies, carbon in our cells, iron in our blood, calcium in our bones, was born in explosions like these. In other words, we were staring into our own origins, while also glimpsing the distant fate of our sun, when one day, it too will perish in a similar burst. Human curiosity flared, but beneath it pulsed a quiet terror. Was this a mirror of our future? In classrooms, teachers led children outside, pointing upward. Remember this moment. You are witnessing a lesson no textbook will ever contain. Children shouted with joy, excited as if they were watching fireworks, but their parents stood trembling in silence. Knowing this was no entertainment, it was a brutal reminder that the universe has no concern for the fragility of humankind. Against this backdrop, 3i Atlas became an even more ominous symbol. If the light from Orion and Lyra was an echo from the distant past, then Atlas was the living embodiment of an uncertain present. The interstellar wanderer drifted silently overhead, exactly as two novas erupted together, forming an image many interpreted as deliberate cosmic choreography. Was it chance, or was coincidence itself a message? The question spread across the world, thickening the atmosphere of wonder laced with dread. And so, among billions of people, something extraordinary happened. Though each reacted differently, some sang, some wept, some prayed, they all agreed on one truth. Never had the universe felt so close, and never had it felt so terrifying. In the days following the twin eruptions of Orion and Lyra, the scientific world turned into a fever unlike anything seen before. Observatories large and small across the planet worked through day and night, streaming torrents of data into servers that burned hot with overload. Some astronomers called it a golden rain of data, for never before had they witnessed two stellar explosions occur almost simultaneously within the same field of view, allowing a side-by-side comparison of every detail, like two opposing performances orchestrated by the universe exclusively for humanity. The results left everyone breathless. Orion's nova, with peak temperatures measured above 20 million degrees Kelvin, blasted billions of tons of plasma into space. Lyra's nova, in contrast, unleashed 3 times as much X-ray and gamma radiation as Orion, a firework invisible to the naked eye yet captured by specialized telescopes. At a NASA press conference, one researcher remarked, "If Orion is the pounding of drums, Lyra is the shriek of strings tearing space apart. We are listening to the symphony of death." Scientific numbers became cinematic material. Electrons compressed under monstrous pressure were hurled outward at near light speed, colliding with protons to create a storm of particles. Shockwaves tore through space like cosmic earthquakes, sweeping clean entire clouds of gas across light years. The Chandra and James Webb telescopes captured images of stardust heated to a searing red, spiraling into vast vortices like open wounds bleeding within the Milky Way. Local laboratories, usually devoted to modest studies, suddenly became part of this global symphony. University students in Tokyo tracked spectral lines in real time, shouting with joy as hydrogen flared across their screens like a living signal. A group of high school students in Mexico, using an amateur telescope, recorded the first images of Lyra Nova's secondary outburst. Their photo went viral worldwide, praised as the postcard the universe sent to the younger generation. Amid the excitement, scientists realized something profound. For the first time in history, humanity was not merely observing one nova, but two contrasting in nature. Orion thundered with matter, Lyra hissed with radiation. Two dead stars had transformed into two colossal instruments, plucked simultaneously in a furious duet, with humankind as accidental audience. No one dared call it mere coincidence. A major newspaper wrote, "For the first time, the universe performed a duet of light, and it chose the moment when humanity was already trembling at the edge. The media amplified the awe with comparisons. Orion's energy release equaled hundreds of millions of hydrogen bombs exploding at once. Lyra's particle output was enough to shred any magnetic shield had it been near Earth. Of course, we were safe, protected by the gulf of thousands of light years. But safety did not mean peace. On the contrary, people grew more haunted by the realization that the cosmos contained engines of destruction beyond imagination, and they continued to explode, indifferent to our existence. During an emergency online meeting of the International Astronomical Union, an elderly Italian professor whispered with a trembling voice, "I have spent my entire life staring at the sky, but this time, I feel as if the sky is staring back." His words instantly became a symbol of the scientific community's emotions, exhilarated by the data, yet humbled by the cold gaze of the universe. Meanwhile, the name of 3I Atlas once again slipped into the conversation. Journalists asked, "Is it a mere coincidence that the arrival of Atlas coincides with the light from these two novae?" Scientists paused for several seconds before answering, "Perhaps coincidence. But if coincidence is defined by probability, then this probability is so small we are compelled to reflect." And so, in the middle of dry data, the seeds of myth began to sprout once more. In the final days of August 2024, as Orion and Lyra still burned across the heavens, humanity began to understand that it had just listened to a symphony no one was invited to, but no one could refuse. A symphony not written with notes or words, but with ancient light that had left its stars long before humankind learned to write, long before the first civilizations rose. And yet, that light arrived now, in this very moment, when Earth trembled in chaos to enter our eyes. The dominant emotion was no longer mere scientific excitement. It had shifted into a form of existential reverence. For when we gazed at the light of Orion and Lyra, we did not see only a distant past. We saw ourselves fragile beings struggling to find a place in an infinite cosmos. We saw the vulnerability of civilization, how a single solar storm could paralyze the power grid, how one earthquake could bring cities crashing down, and now, how an explosion thousands of light years away could leave us silent, overwhelmed. In urgent symposiums, philosophers were invited alongside scientists. One quoted Carl Sagan, "We are made of star stuff." But this time, the phrase did not ring as poetry. It rang as a verdict. If we truly are stardust, then Orion and Lyra are our ancient parents, reminding us that dust may be born in light, but it may also be scattered into chaos. In many places, people turned inward. Communities once divided by politics or religion gathered together, not to argue, but to look at the sky in silence. In a village in Peru, they held a festival of light, tracing Orion and Lyra into the sand, then lighting thousands of candles. In Canada, a group of musicians gathered outdoors, performing a piece they called Sonata for the Novae, trying to mimic with sound the light they had just witnessed. And in cities still blacked out by the solar storm, the night sky glowed brighter than ever, and many wept as they saw the Milky Way clearly for the first time in their lives. Through it all, 3I Atlas drifted silently, yet its silence made it an indispensable part of this cosmic symphony. If Orion and Lyra were two great instruments sounding from the past, then Atlas was the deep drumbeat of the present, a frozen wanderer appearing at the exact moment, as though to remind us the universe was not only singing of what had been, but marking the rhythm of what was yet to come. And then a dreadful question arose, not only in the halls of science but in the minds of every human being. Why did the light of two novae arrive at this exact time? Was it merely the dry coincidence of physics, or a message, a deliberate accent in the cosmic music, forcing us to listen? If it was a coincidence, it was too perfect, too dramatic, too much like a story. And if it was a message, then who had written it? No one had an answer. Yet within that silence, one truth became clear. We could no longer see ourselves as the center of the universe. We were only spectators in the smallest of seats, witnessing a concert of forces beyond imagination. And that truth that the cosmos continues to perform, indifferent to our existence, planted in humanity's heart a reverence deeper than fear. As Orion and Lyra slowly dimmed in the nights that followed, their echoes still lingered. People began to recount the moment to one another, like retelling a modern myth. Some called it a warning, others a gift, but all agreed that light had changed the way we looked at the sky, and the way we looked at ourselves. The 3rd of September 2024. While the light of Orion and Lyra still flickered faintly in the sky, the ground beneath millions in Turkey suddenly erupted into a nightmare. At 2:17 a.m., a magnitude 7.8 earthquake tore through Anatolia, where fault lines had lain dormant for decades. The roar of the earth sounded like a colossal metal being wrenched apart. Roads split open, concrete shattered like paper. In just 37 seconds, a modern city collapsed into rubble. People were jolted awake by the unnatural roar and hurled themselves into the streets. Some fled wearing only pajamas, clutching children as they stumbled down staircases, swaying like they were about to give way. Many buildings could not withstand the force, snapping like matchsticks, releasing clouds of dust that swallowed entire neighborhoods. Streetlights went dark, screams echoed through the air, tangled with the crack of breaking concrete and the wails of car alarms. Social media lit up with frantic videos, ceilings caving in, lamps swinging wildly, voices crying out, "Oh God," through trembling phone cameras. The European Mediterranean Seismological Center, EMSC, issued an alert only minutes later, but by the time the data was confirmed, the world was already reeling. The rupture zone stretched over 200 kilometers, the hypocenter at a depth of just 15 kilometers, a shallow quake that allowed seismic waves to radiate with devastating force. Scientists described it as the classic lock-slip-release scenario, where the Anatolian plates had pressed against each other for decades, building stress until it ruptured in one violent instant. Seismic waves rolled out like invisible tsunamis, shaking the ground as far as Syria, Lebanon, and Greece. And, as always, the quake did not end with one strike. Sensors recorded hundreds of aftershocks within hours, many over magnitude 5. Each aftershock felt like a knife twisting into an open wound. Rescuers digging desperately for survivors were forced to scatter in panic as the earth rumbled again, leaving cries for help fading into dust. On live television, viewers watched entire apartment blocks crumble in slow motion, like a nightmare playing frame by frame with no end. The world held its breath. Emergency bulletins flooded every screen. The hashtag number #TurkeyEarthquake rose to the top of global trends within 10 minutes. In New York, people stayed awake all night, glued to live streams of rescue efforts in Istanbul. In Cairo, crowds gathered to pray, sending condolences through digital threads. In Tokyo, headlines screamed, "Is Japan next?" For its people knew that stress transfer could trigger distant fault lines across the planet. Amid the haze of dust and smoke, many looked skyward, where the faint glow of Orion and Lyra still lingered. They whispered, "Did the stars awaken the Earth?" Scientists quickly dismissed the idea. No physical mechanism links novas to earthquakes. Yet in the public imagination, the terrifying coincidence between ancient light above and violent tremors below was enough to seed suspicion. And on online forums, one name resurfaced: 3I Atlas. It drifts past, and the Earth trembles. This cannot be a chance. The emotion that gripped the planet was not only fear, it was suffocating tension, panic that spread faster than aftershocks, a gnawing unease about what might come next, deep sorrow for those buried beneath the ruins, and the sobering reminder that our planet needs only a single shudder to drag an entire civilization to its knees. When the sun rose on the morning of September 3, its light did not bring life, it exposed devastation. Streets once bustling in Adana, Gaziantep, and Kahramanmaraş had become seas of rubble. From above, rescue drones captured images of entire cities like shattered mosaics, concrete blocks stacked chaotically, as if giant hands had crushed Lego bricks into dust. The dominant sound was no longer the quake, but cries for help. From beneath slabs of stone came hoarse voices. "I'm still alive. Please save me." Rescuers, with bare hands and excavators alike, clawed at the wreckage, fighting against time to pull lives from the ruins. But whenever aftershocks rolled in, they were forced to scatter, watching helplessly as outstretched arms disappeared into clouds of dust. The scenes were broadcast live, leaving millions of viewers around the globe frozen in silence, fists clenched, able to do nothing but weep. As always, social media became the planet's nervous system. Short clips of babies pulled from rubble, faces coated in grey dust, eyes wide with terror spread at the speed of light. The hashtag number #PrayForTurkey appeared in tens of millions of posts within hours. People shared moments both heartbreaking and miraculous, a boy clutching a tiny surviving cat, an old woman gripping the hand of a rescuer and whispering, "Thank you," soldiers crying as they heard the faint tapping of children, signaling life from beneath collapsed walls. Yet, alongside the moments of hope, came despair. Videos showed hundreds gathered outside hospitals, waiting desperately for news of loved ones, wailing in helplessness. Some shouted at reporters, "Why must we always die like this? Why was there no warning?" Those questions reverberated far beyond Turkey's borders, morphing into a global indictment of the fragility of early warning systems and humanity's powerlessness before nature's fury. Seismologists appeared on broadcasts, explaining rupture zones, stress accumulation along the Anatolian fault, and how decades of pressure had been released. They spoke of aftershock sequences, warning that tremors could last for weeks. But to those who had just lost their families, the words, though precise, rang hollow, like a foreign language. For them, science no longer felt like refuge, only a cold reminder that none of this loss could be undone. In other cities, fear spread as quickly as the seismic waves. In Athens, people poured into the streets after feeling distant tremors. In Beirut, no one slept that night, afraid of the next jolt. In Cairo, shops were filled with panicked crowds, hoarding supplies, fearful of shortages. An earthquake in Anatolia had rippled into a psychological quake across the entire Mediterranean. Above it all, Orion and Lyra still burned in the sky, two wounds of light etched into the night. Many looked at them with resentment. Why did you explode? Except to spread more fear. The coincidence of ancient light and trembling ground ignited conspiracy theories. Some claimed gamma waves from the novas had triggered the Anatolian rupture. Others insisted 3I Atlas carried a mysterious energy that had stirred Earth's crust. These theories lacked evidence, but in chaos, people will cling to any explanation that offers the illusion of order. And so, the prevailing emotion was not just panic at the disaster, it was compassion swelling across borders. Images of children orphaned in seconds, of families erased in an instant, became a tolling bell for the entire planet, a reminder that we are not safe and that any city could be next. While rescuers still battled collapsed buildings, the scientific community entered a different race, a race for data. Seismograph charts from Turkey, released online, showed jagged spikes, stacked like the teeth of a monstrous saw. The main shock, followed by a cascade of aftershocks, formed a seismic chain stretching hundreds of minutes. Seismologists warned, this was only the beginning. The concept of stress transfer was repeated across television networks. When one segment of a fault ruptures, it unleashes colossal energy, but in doing so, it presses new stress onto adjacent sections. Like when a single link in a chain snaps, the entire strand grows taut. And Anatolia was no single chain. It was a tangled web, connected to the Caucasus, the Mediterranean, and even influencing the Aegean. Each aftershock, though weaker, carried the potential to ignite another catastrophe. Heat maps painted a scarlet stripe more than 200 kilometers long, cutting through central Turkey, the rupture zone just torn open. Some scientists whisper, it looks like a giant crack in the heart of Anatolia. On academic forums, predictions circulated. Major cities like Ankara or Istanbul could be affected if stress propagated further. No one dared to state it as fact, but the possibility alone was enough to sow global unease. Meanwhile, another painful question rose. Why had so many modern buildings collapsed so swiftly? Structural experts admitted that countless constructions failed to meet earthquake-resistant standards, despite being built in a region scarred by past disasters. Images of freshly built concrete blocks crumbled no differently than aging houses became proof of civilization's fragility. Citizens cried out, "We didn't die because of nature. We died because of human greed and negligence." That brutal truth was not only Turkey's grief, it was a warning to every city on Earth. Tokyo, Los Angeles, Mexico City all sit atop massive fault lines, and if a modern metropolis could collapse in just 37 seconds, what city could claim safety with confidence? Against this backdrop, Orion and Lyra still glimmered above, like twin eyes staring down at humanity. Scientists repeated, again and again, that no physical link connected novas to earthquakes, but the public, torn between data and grief, did not hear them. Online, the theory of a resonance effect spread. Some claimed gamma light from the novas had triggered micro-vibrations in Earth's crust, sparking the quake. Though dismissed by academia, the idea traveled fast, for it voiced a deeper truth. People were desperate to assign blame for the chaos. In countless interviews, seismologists tried to stay calm, explaining parameters one by one. They spoke of P waves and S waves, of how surface waves inflicted the fiercest shaking. But to the public, each term, P wave, S wave, sounded like meaningless codes, unable to soothe raw fear. Science could explain, but it could not heal. And that vacuum was filled with anxiety, rumor, and the gnawing sense that the ground beneath our feet might betray us at any moment. The emotion that engulfed the moment was a bitter compound. Tension from looming aftershocks, panic that stress transfer could spark the next disaster, unease at the fragility of cities, grief for the victims, and the resounding reminder that this was not just one nation's tragedy. It was a warning for all of humanity. As news of the Turkish earthquake flooded every media outlet, the world's reaction spread as fast as the aftershocks. The United Nations declared a humanitarian emergency. Dozens of nations immediately dispatched rescue teams, transport planes loaded with medicine, tents, and food bound for Ankara. The international airport roared with engines as waves of men and women in orange and blue uniforms rushed into the disaster zone, carrying fragments of hope into a sea of despair. In Europe, the EU Parliament convened an emergency session, broadcast live to millions. Politicians rose to pledge that Turkey will not stand alone. Yet, almost instantly, accusations followed. Why had the early warning systems failed? Why were building standards ignored? Headlines screamed, natural disaster or human failure. Within those questions, the public's faith in government cracked once more. In the United States, the White House held a midnight press conference. The president offered condolences, promised aid, and stressed, "We are witnessing the fragility of global civilization." The phrase replayed endlessly, scrolling across television screens. Fragility of civilization. It struck a chord, because everyone knew that fragility belonged not only to Turkey. Meanwhile, social media became a second battlefield. Photographs of a child's hand reaching out from rubble drew tens of millions of shares. A video of rescuers singing lullabies to a trapped infant became a symbol of hope. Yet alongside humanity's tenderness, conspiracy theories erupted. Some claimed the quake was the result of secret weapons tests. Others insisted 3I, Atlas, emitted gravitational waves that shook the Earth. Each post poured fuel into the ocean of anxiety, blurring the line between truth and fabrication. And like a recurring ghost, the name 3I Atlas surfaced again. Newspapers blared, Novae, Atlas, and Quake, three bells of the apocalypse. Television programs invited scientists to analyze, but the answers were the same. There is no evidence that Atlas caused the earthquake. The public did not want denial, they wanted a culprit. And in the collective imagination, Atlas, the silent wanderer from a distant star system, became the perfect emblem of invisible fear. In many major cities, small protests erupted. People carried signs, "We want the truth about Atlas." In some places, riots broke out as citizens accused governments of concealing a connection between the celestial body and the catastrophe. News broadcasts showed crowds raising their glowing phones to the sky, chanting the name of an interstellar traveler that no one had even heard of just months before. While politics, science, and media fought to claim the narrative, ambulances still screamed through the night. Children still cried in the dark. A mother still clutched her child's body outside a hospital, her eyes emptied of life. Behind the statistics, more than 20,000 dead, tens of thousands missing, lay stories of pain no pen could capture. And in those stories, compassion spread across borders, transcending language and nation. On the night of September 5, when a sixth one aftershock shook Ankara once again, the entire planet held its breath. In the sky, Orion and Lyra still glowed. On the ground, 3I Atlas was tracked every second by telescopes. The world seemed caught inside a surreal play, where astronomy, geology, and politics overlapped in a chaotic symphony. And at the center of that performance, the dominant emotions remained tension and panic, but woven within them was compassion and unease feelings that made humanity tremble, yet also bound it together. As the first days of September came to a close, the statistics grew cold and sharp as knives. More than 40,000 lives lost, hundreds of thousands left homeless, millions without power, without water, without hope. The numbers climbed higher each day, But behind them lay countless stories. A father digging with his bare hands for 3 days in search of his daughter. A mother clutching the only surviving family photograph, a child too exhausted to cry any longer. These images filled screens everywhere, reminders that modern civilization, with all its satellites, supercomputers, and skyscrapers, remains powerless against the roar of the Earth. What unsettled the world most was not only the destruction, but the speed at which fear spread. In California, officials rushed to conduct evacuation drills, fearing the San Andreas Fault might be pressured by global stress transfer. In Japan, citizens lined up to buy batteries, bottled water, and dry food. In Chile, bold headlines declared, "Could we be the next Turkey?" No one treated the Anatolian quake as a local tragedy anymore. It had become a mirror for the entire planet, a warning that any place could be next. At international summits, the phrase global seismic vulnerability was repeated like a refrain.
Atlas,
Experts
a mirror
warned that
of
the dense
finitude.
populations of coastal megacities,
Indeed,
combined
an
with
allegory
aging
of
infrastructure,
cosmic burden.
left humanity perched atop ticking time bombs. Some politicians demanded the creation of a global earthquake shield, but scientists could only smile bitterly. No wall can stop the Earth from trembling. The only defenses we have are preparation and prayer. Meanwhile, the light of Orion and Lyra continued to pour silently into the night. Many began to see them as two immense funeral candles burning for the souls lost in Anatolia. The metaphor spread quickly. Even the sky is in mourning. On social media, people stitched together images of the Novas with scenes of rescue efforts, turning them into posters that went viral worldwide, transforming disaster into a living myth. Yet alongside compassion, a metaphysical dread seeped in. Was the universe using ancient light to illuminate the fragility of our present? And in those discussions, the name 3I Atlas echoed once more. Just as humanity staggered under the weight of the quake, newspapers declared, "Atlas is watching us from afar." Many came to believe the celestial body was a silent witness to the chaos. Novas exploding, the Earth quaking, politics fracturing. Society is unraveling, all unfolding under the still gaze of the interstellar wanderer. It did not cause these events, yet its absolute silence turned it into a mirror, reflecting our helplessness. On the night of September 9,
Will the
when a
Atlas
powerful
aftermath
aftershock
destabilize
rattled
the outer
Istanbul,
rim?
millions
We are
poured
still
into the
assessing the
streets.
full
They
impact.
lifted their eyes to the sky, where Orion and Lyra still flickered, and somewhere along the horizon, Atlas drifted quietly. In that moment, a strange realization settled over the crowd, not just panic or fear, but a bitter awakening, that this civilization, with all its technology, its theories, its pride, can be shaken to its core by a single shudder of the planet. And so, the catastrophe left behind not only ruins, but also a global warning. Either we learn to live humbly with the Earth, or we will continue to be swallowed by its fury. Orion, Lyra, and Atlas, three symbols etched into the September sky of 2024, were not merely astronomical phenomena. They had become emblems of chaos, of compassion, and above all, of existential fragility. The 15th of September 2024, only 12 days after the catastrophic Anatolian earthquake, and less than a week since the light of Orion and Lyra still burned across the night sky, the sun suddenly ignited. From a massive dark sunspot swirling on its surface, an X-class flare, the highest category on the solar energy scale, erupted with ferocity. NASA's SOHO and SDO space telescopes captured the spectacle. A colossal column of fire, towering dozens of times higher than Earth itself, surging upward before snapping back into the void. Almost instantly, a coronal mass ejection, CME, a plasma and magnetic storm weighing billions of tons, was hurled into space at nearly 2,200 kilometers per second, roughly 8 million kilometers per hour. Space weather centers immediately raised red alerts. The Enlil simulation was activated, glowing on the screens of hundreds of computers at NASA and ESA. On the models, the CME appeared as a massive red arc, swelling outward and sweeping across planetary orbits. Within minutes, engineers realized something that left them frozen. The CME's path not only engulfed Earth's orbit, but also intersected the trajectory of 3I Atlas, the interstellar wanderer, drifting silently near Mars. The first reaction in the scientific community was dread. A CME is not to be underestimated. A strong one can trigger a G5 geomagnetic storm, crippling satellites, collapsing global power grids, disrupting navigation systems, and plunging humanity into darkness within hours. History remembers the Carrington event of 859, when a CME fried the primitive telegraph network of the time. But in 2024, with civilization more dependent on technology than ever before, a repeat of such an event could unleash consequences beyond any natural disaster known. Yet alongside the fear came another feeling: anticipation. For the first time in human history, a massive CME was on course to collide directly with a celestial body from beyond the solar system. Scientists called it an unprecedented natural experiment. Atlas, a primordial block of ice and rock carrying matter from a distant star system, and was about to be swept by plasma, millions of degrees hot and tangled magnetic fields. Would it shatter? Would it flare? Or would it react in ways no one had ever imagined? Global media erupted instantly. CNN ran the banner, "Solar Monster Eruption Atlas in Path," BBC declared, "Unprecedented cosmic encounter." Online platforms flooded with simulations, a fiery arc swallowing a tiny object labeled Atlas. Talk shows brought on experts to explain, "We are witnessing a symphony between the sun and an interstellar traveler. This is no longer just astronomy, it is a moment redefining our place in the universe." Forecast models were updated around the clock. Propagation charts showed the CME could sweep past Earth within 48 hours. Starlink satellites are in safe modes. NASA issued warnings to power companies: prepare for widespread grid outages. Yet alongside mounting anxiety, a pulse of excitement spread across research institutes. An astrophysicist at Harvard exclaimed, "If Atlas survives the impact, we'll learn more about interstellar matter in days than in decades of study." On social media, hashtags #SolarStorm and #Atlas Collision shot to the top worldwide. People posted simulated auroras, shared animated videos of a cosmic tsunami racing toward Earth. Among millions of anxious updates, voices of hope emerged. Maybe this is our chance to learn more about our cosmic home. But beneath the noise, in the collective unconscious, the dominant emotion was fear. Because everyone knew, when the sun grows angry, no nation, no technology stands apart. And at the center of it all, Atlas drifted silently. It did not know, or perhaps it did not need to know, that billions of eyes were fixed upon it. It simply continued along its orbit, a small yet fateful note in the symphony the sun had just unleashed. And humanity, holding its breath, wondered, was this the beginning of a great discovery, or a harsh warning from the universe itself? September 16, only 24 hours after the eruption, the solar plasma storm began spilling into near-Earth space. Global space weather centers updated their data non-stop. On NOAA's radar screens, the CME appeared like an electromagnetic tsunami, its shock front expanding outward, spreading like an invisible wall of light. Experts gave it a name that felt both poetic and terrifying: the solar tsunami. And in its path lay not only Earth, but also 3I Atlas, drifting along an intersecting orbit. News broadcasts turned into countdown clocks. CNN scrolled the words, "Impact in 30 hours." BBC broke down the scenarios. Auroras may stretch as far south as 20 degrees latitude, meaning skies from Mexico to India could ignite in a massive dance of light. Yet beneath the lyrical descriptions lay a harsher truth. The wider the auroras, the more violently Earth's magnetic field was being attacked, and the higher the risk of a worldwide blackout. Inside satellite control centers, the atmosphere grew as tense as a courtroom. Engineers argued furiously. Should every satellite be put into safe mode, shutting down nearly all systems to avoid permanent damage, even if it meant a global communications blackout? Some supported it. Others warned that such a move would paralyze finance, aviation, and media. The final decision was delayed, as if humanity itself was gambling against the universe. Meanwhile, news outlets and social media fanned the flames of fear. 3D renderings of the CME barreling toward Earth were shared millions of times. Hashtags #Cosmic Collision and #Atlas Under Fire flooded Twitter and Weibo. Live streams attracted tens of millions of viewers, waiting for every update that flashed across the screen. Plasma impact approaching. Fear became a kind of global ritual, the whole planet holding its breath together. Atlas, of course, remained unaware. It was still just a cold lump of ice and rock, a few kilometers across, drifting silently. But in humanity's collective imagination, Atlas had become a character. People painted it swallowed by a wave of plasma or igniting into a brilliant torch. Children asked their parents, "What happens if Atlas explodes?" Scientists could only force a weak smile and answer, "We don't know." And those 3 words, "we don't know," shook the world even more than silence. For scientists, worry was mixed with exhilaration. A team at MIT compared the event to a nuclear experiment on a cosmic scale, carried out by the Sun itself, with Atlas as the target. If the plasma pierced its icy surface, Atlas might release jets of water vapor, organic gases, perhaps even bursts of visible light. It would be the first time humanity witnessed, in real time, the impact of a CME on an interstellar object, a golden chance to uncover the primordial makeup of matter beyond the solar system. But for the public, fascination was drowned out by fear. Supermarkets everywhere reported panic buying of supplies, backup batteries, and bottled water. In Tokyo, people lined up for flashlights. In Los Angeles, sales of generators spiked. And in Istanbul, still staggering from the earthquake earlier that month, panic returned. Families who had just lost their homes now faced the prospect of losing power, losing connection, losing hope. On the night of September 16, the sky itself began to change. Across northern Europe, auroras appeared earlier than expected, violet and green curtains unfurling across the heavens like spectral veils. Many live-streamed the spectacle, marveling and trembling at once. It's breathtakingly beautiful, but it feels like an omen. Experts warned, this was only the beginning. The worst was still ahead. And in the silence beyond, billions of eyes turned toward a distant point in space, where 3I Atlas drifted, waiting for its fateful encounter with the storm unleashed by the Sunday. At dawn on the 17th of September 2024, the massive plasma storm finally struck Earth's magnetosphere. Within the first few minutes, NOAA's sensors recorded the KP index spiking to 9, the absolute maximum of the geomagnetic storm scale. The entire planet shuddered at the announcement. Extreme geomagnetic storm in progress. Scientists, their voices trembling, called it the Carrington event of the 21st century. The skies transformed instantly. From Canada to Texas, from northern Europe to India, auroras erupted like colossal curtains of fire, green, violet, crimson blanketing the heavens. In Mexico City, people watched the horizon flicker as if waves of flame were pouring down. In Cairo, photographs captured violet pillars of light bending over the desert horizon. The scenes were broadcast live to billions, plunging humanity into a surreal emotion, mesmerized by the beauty, suffocated by the terror, knowing these lights were the warning signs of an invisible assault on the systems our survival depends upon. And just as predicted, technology began to falter. Dozens of satellites threw error codes. Some went completely silent. Across North America, power grids trembled under surging geomagnetically induced currents, forcing emergency shutdowns to prevent total collapse. In Europe, mobile networks failed, and planes were diverted for emergency landings as GPS navigation went dark. On social media, millions cried out, "The internet is dying," a sensation both panicked and unreal, as if civilization itself was being strangled by the collapse of its own technological bloodstream. Meanwhile, all eyes turned skyward toward space, where 3I Atlas lay in the CME's path. Ground-based telescopes and orbital observatories focused everything on it. The data streamed in. The plasma wave touched Atlas's position at 3:42 UTC. Instruments registered an anomaly, a subtle increase in brightness across the spectrum, as though the icy surface had begun to heat. Some sensors detected vapor jets rising off the object, signs that ice on Atlas was sublimating under the blast of particles carrying millions of degrees of heat. That moment was described as a single drumbeat in the cosmic symphony. No one knew what would follow. Scientists held their breath. Would Atlas fracture into thousands of shards, or would it ignite into a radiant torch? On television, an astronomer gasped, "We are watching history being written in plasma." Data feeds spiked and quivered. NASA's charts showed strange bursts, jagged spikes. Some scientists argued Atlas had just vented a plume of gas, a flash glimmering faintly across the void. But constant communication disruptions made verification agonizingly slow. Earth became a vast theater, billions of spectators holding silent breath, waiting for the next note of the cosmic symphony. On the ground, humanity staggered through chaos. In New York, the subway ground to a halt, thousands trapped in darkness, clinging to handheld radios for scraps of news. In Tokyo, long lines formed for batteries and oil lamps. In Istanbul, still broken from the earthquake, People looked up as the city drowned in auroral light, a beauty so haunting that many burst into tears. And yet, amid the upheaval, a faint hope flickered. Scientists called it the experiment no one ever dared to dream of. If Atlas reacted in unexpected ways, it could reveal the primordial structure of interstellar matter, offering a key to the universe's origins. But for the public, what mattered was not data, but emotion, the breathless suspense of living through the climax of a story whose ending had yet to be revealed. As dawn broke on September 18, the auroras slowly faded, giving way to the familiar grey-blue of the sky. After a night trembling beneath ghostly curtains of green and violet fire, humanity looked upward and felt an uncanny emptiness. The heavens were silent again, but the memory of that planetary storm of light lingered like the echo of a terrifying dream. For millions, it would forever be remembered as the night Earth itself became a concert of light, breathtakingly beautiful, yet ominous, like a wordless warning from the universe. Damage reports soon began to roll in. Across North America, parts of the power grid had collapsed for hours, leaving vast swaths in darkness. In Europe, the internet faltered, and thousands of flights were cancelled. In Asia, multiple communication satellites dropped offline, forcing emergency system resets. Yet the greatest impact was not physical loss, but psychological dread. The realization that just a single sneeze from the sun could shake the foundations of human civilization. Inside the laboratories, all attention turned toward the readings from 3I Atlas. Instruments confirmed clear signs of sublimation, faint trails of water vapor, CO2, and light organic gases escaping as the CME swept across its surface. Some scientists argued that brief flashes of light suggested violent reactions within its icy crust. Atlas had not disintegrated, but it had revealed a fragment of its hidden core primordial material, perhaps carrying records of an environment that existed tens of light-years away. For the scientific community, it was a treasure trove, a gift from the sun and a wanderer beyond. His word, in fixed testing of not to self. Meanwhile, the public was haunted by a different question. How had Atlas survived? On social media, speculation surged. Some insisted it had transformed into a luminous body, carrying a mysterious message. Others believed it was slowly disintegrating, destined to vanish within months. 3D renderings of a burning Atlas spread like wildfire, turning it into a cultural icon both terrifying and mesmerizing. In many cities, people gathered outdoors to recount their experiences of the auroral night. Some called it the Night of Destiny, others named it the night the cosmos sang to humankind. And within the fear, a softer light flickered, hope. For amid the chaos, people had felt deeply connected to each other, to the fragility of the planet, to the truth that they were not isolated individuals but a single vulnerable community sharing one fragile home. Media headlines crystallized the sentiment, Atlas still drifts. Indeed, despite the solar storm, it had not vanished, exploded, or fractured into shards. It simply continued on its course, silent as ever. Yet in human eyes, it was no longer an anonymous block of ice and rock. It had become a witness, an enduring figure in the fiercest encounter between the sun and earth of this century. And in that survival, Atlas took on a new meaning, a symbol of resilience in silence, an allegory that sometimes endurance itself is the purest form of strength. The echoes of the event rippled for weeks. International summits debated upgrades to shield infrastructure from future solar storms. Research institutes released torrents of new data, declaring it one of the most valuable natural experiments in modern scientific history. And in everyday conversations, people still whispered about the night the sky sang in light, about Atlas, the distant traveler that endured the fury of the Sunday. By the end of September, humanity found itself in a strange emotional balance, terrified by the fragility of its civilization, exhilarated by the door of knowledge just opened, curious about the secrets Atlas might yet reveal, and above all, carrying a quiet hope that in the violent silence of the cosmos, we were not merely victims, but witnesses to a symphony never before played. By late September 2024, the solar storm had ebbed, the auroras had faded, and Atlas still drifted silently along its orbit. But on Earth, the aftershocks of the event continued to reverberate within the human heart. As cities restored their power grids and the internet flickered back online, what returned first was not relief but heavy questions. Had everything that just unfolded been a random coincidence, Or was it part of a deliberate sequence, orchestrated by the universe itself to deliver a message? On live broadcasts, scientists rotated through the spotlight. They displayed probability graphs and complex computer models. They spoke of statistical randomness. Two novae can erupt nearly simultaneously. An earthquake may strike after decades of geological stress. An extreme CME can burst forth at any point in the solar cycle. Taken separately, each event had a clear physical explanation. One prominent statistician even stressed, "Randomness happens all the time. The only unusual thing here is that we're observing too many extremes in the same time frame." But then the host asked a question that froze the studio. If it's all just a coincidence, why did it unfold precisely at the moment when humanity was looking skyward the most, with every telescope trained on Atlas? It was a question that no model could answer, and it pierced directly into the collective unease. The public was not easily swayed by numbers. Cold data alone could not soothe them. On social media, millions voiced the same impression that the universe was whispering something humanity had not yet learned to understand. Thousands of theories bloomed. Atlas as an interstellar messenger, Orion and Lyra as cosmic symbols, the CME as a drumbeat. Some believed it was a warning, urging humanity to pause and reflect inward. Pseudoscientific notions, spiritual musings, even wild conspiracies all mingled together, and instead of being dismissed, they were openly debated, as if humanity, in its chaos, was desperate for meaning. Philosophers quickly joined the fray. In Paris, a literature professor published a commentary that went viral. "This is the moment we are forced to read the universe as a poem. Poems do not provide answers, they arrange images so we may see ourselves. Atlas says nothing, but its silence is the answer." That sentence was quoted millions of times because it touched what numbers never could. The sense that sometimes the cosmos arranges itself as verse. In many halls, science and philosophy found themselves sitting at the same table. Scientists cautioned, "Be careful, don't assign intention to randomness." Philosophers countered, "Humanity must search for meaning if it is to survive in a cold and indifferent cosmos." And in between, the public listened, curious, uneasy, and hopeful that a balance could be found between data and belief. Even the world's newspapers shifted tone. Instead of reporting only on statistics or physical models, they began probing emotional depth. The New York Times ran the headline, "Atlas's Silence, a Mirror to Humanity." The Guardian wrote, "When the universe stages a play, do we not have the right to ask what role we are meant to play?" Those words transformed the crisis from a purely scientific narrative into a collective meditation. In cafes, on sidewalks, in classrooms, Atlas became a constant subject of conversation. A father told his son, "Perhaps the universe doesn't care about us at all." But the boy answered, "If that's true, then why do we feel like it's calling our name?" That dialogue echoed across millions of places, in countless forms, creating an atmosphere that was at once curious, unsettled, and quietly open to possibilities beyond old frameworks of thought. And through it all, the dominant emotion shifted. It was no longer the raw terror of the early days, but reflection and anxious wondering. Were we merely living inside a game of probabilities, or inside a cosmic symphony already composed? No one could answer. But perhaps it was the absence of an answer itself that forced humanity to pause, to contemplate, and to search for new meaning within the infinite silence. In early October 2024, the United Nations convened a special assembly in Geneva. The official theme, Atlas and the Chain of Cosmic Phenomena, Science, Probability, Meaning. More than 1,000 delegates, scientists, philosophers, theologians, and even writers and artists were invited. The Palexpo Hall became something unprecedented in human history, a global forum where humanity gathered not only to debate numbers but to wrestle with existential meaning. In the opening address, the UN Secretary-General declared, "Atlas is not a nation, not a religion, not a theory. It is a mirror, and we must dare to look into it." The sentence was quoted instantly across hundreds of newspapers. It set the tone for the days ahead, cautious yet curious, with the shared recognition that this event had moved beyond the boundaries of pure science. The first session belonged to the astronomers. They projected Enlil simulations, CME propagation data, and Novae probability statistics. One expert insisted, "The chance of two novae erupting nearly simultaneously, followed by an extreme CME, is low, but not zero. Randomness remains the most reasonable answer. The audience responded with scattered applause. Some nodded, yet many faces stayed furrowed in thought. Then it was the philosopher's turn. A professor from Brazil stepped up to the podium and spoke slowly. Probability is the language of reason, but human beings do not live by reason alone. When we witness three extreme cosmic events unfolding in sequence, we are compelled to ask, is there a meaning that lies beyond the data? The universe sometimes arranges itself like poetry, and in poetry, chance becomes rhythm. The hall fell silent for a moment, then erupted into a long round of applause. By the afternoon, theologians and cultural scholars joined in. A Muslim cleric remarked, "Atlas is a reminder that humanity must remain humble before the infinite creation of God." A Buddhist scholar calmly replied, "Perhaps Atlas sends no message at all, but merely reflects our own minds. We are afraid, so we see a warning. We long for meaning, so we see poetry." The dialogue, though born of different traditions, felt like a single circle in which humanity sat together, discussing a shared mystery. The media called the gathering the Global Forum of Meaning. Billions tuned in online. Video clips spread like wildfire. A scientist and a philosopher shaking hands, a cleric breaking down in tears as he spoke of humanity's smallness. The entire hall rising in applause when a young student stood to say, "We don't need to choose between science and poetry. Perhaps both are true." The atmosphere was a strange fusion, cautious in its data, curious in its mind, and open in its heart. Cautious, because everyone understood that projecting too much meaning onto randomness could lead to superstition. Curious, because no one could resist asking why it had all happened at once. And open, because for the first time, humanity realized it could look up at the sky together, not divided by nationality or creed, but simply as beings listening to the silence of the cosmos. As the day ended, journalists swarmed the corridors, asking everyone the same question: "Do you believe this was a coincidence or a message?" No one offered a definitive answer, but many repeated the same phrase: "Whatever it was, Atlas has forced us to sit together." And perhaps that, in itself, was the first meaning, not one delivered by the universe, but one born from the way humanity had chosen to respond to it. After the Geneva Conference, the world did not grow less bewildered. On the contrary, every layer of society seemed to enter a phase of collective reflection. Speeches were clipped into short videos that spread across the internet, drawing billions from bustling metropolises to remote villages into the same conversation about Atlas. No one had a definitive answer, but all felt pulled into a shared human question. Among the young, a new movement blossomed: cosmic reflection. They painted, composed music, and wrote poetry about Atlas. Graffiti walls in Berlin, New York, and Tokyo are filled with images of the silent celestial wanderer, often paired with the words, "Sometimes the universe arranges itself like poetry." Indie bands compose songs inspired by the silence of Atlas, turning a cosmic phenomenon into the language of popular art. In a world saturated with data, people unexpectedly found comfort in ambiguity. Across nations, spiritual movements also surged. Some groups believed Atlas was a mirror of humanity, forcing us to face our treatment of Earth. Others claimed it was a messenger of trial, sent to test our capacity for unity. Diverse though they were, these movements shared one common thread. They were not grounded in apocalyptic fear, but in a kind of cautious curiosity. No one screamed, "The end is near." Instead, they whispered, "If this is a message, how should we read it?" The Restley file is a stone, the fave what for lay. Meanwhile, the scientific community was compelled to change how it spoke to the public. Instead of dismissing speculations outright, they began using language that was more accessible. One young astronomer wrote on Twitter, "Perhaps this is only a coincidence, but I don't fault anyone for seeing poetry in it. Because when I look at the data myself, I feel my heart tremble." That post was shared more than 2 million times, proving that science and emotion could stand side by side without cancelling each other out. On a social level, people began shifting their habits. They went outdoors at night, more often, to look up at the sky. Amateur stargazing clubs saw their membership soar. Bookstores reported spikes in sales of astronomy, philosophy, and even poetry. The Atlas event had become a spiritual nudge, pulling humanity's eyes away from phone screens to search for something larger than themselves. Yet, not everyone found comfort. For some, the ambiguity deepened their unease. They feared that if the universe had indeed arranged this chain of events, then humanity was nothing more than pawns in an invisible game. A psychologist in New Delhi wrote, "Many patients now come to me not with personal depression, but with cosmic anxiety. They ask, if Atlas has meaning, then what is the meaning of my life?" Fear had spilled beyond science, morphing into a global existential unease. New theories continued to emerge. A team of scholars in Mexico published a paper arguing statistical randomness cannot adequately explain the synchronicity of 3 major events in September. They proposed the concept of cosmic resonance. Though lacking hard evidence, the idea spread quickly because it tapped into the public psyche. People wanted to believe there was an invisible connection, a hidden rhythm binding the events together. In contrast, a group of philosophers in Northern Europe insisted, the important thing is not to discover who or what is behind this, but how we respond. They treated Atlas as a mirror. If we saw fear, it was our fear reflected. If we saw hope, it was our longing shining through. And it was precisely this ambiguity, they argued, that forced humanity to open itself to one another, to listen to different stories without rushing to judgment. On the final nights of October, citizens in many cities organized their own cosmic vigils. They lit candles, sat in silence for hours, and gazed at the night sky not to beg for a miracle, but to remind one another that silence itself can be a form of answer. Thousands of tiny flames flickering under the vast darkness moved many to tears. Perhaps, for the first time in modern history, humanity was united not by clarity, but by shared bewilderment, and by the willingness to contemplate together. November 2024. The weeks of chaos gradually passed, but instead of vanishing, they settled into the collective memory like layers of sediment. At first, people were bewildered by the chain of events, then they argued, then they spun countless theories. But now, a new state began to form, a calm contemplation. Humanity slowly realized that perhaps the question, why, did not require an absolute answer, that the absence of an answer was itself the message. At universities, discussions on Atlas became a special subject. Philosophy students sat beside astronomy majors, debating chance and necessity. An elderly professor at Oxford said, "We've spent a century trying to find answers. Perhaps it's time to learn how to live with the questions." The room fell silent, then erupted in applause. In that moment, science and philosophy were no longer opposing shores, but 2 parallel paths on the same journey toward meaning. On a personal level, many people began to change how they viewed life. Psychologists reported the rise of a new concept, cosmic humility. Instead of panicking, people learned to let go of the need for absolute control. A woman in New York shared on a news feature, "When I saw the red aurora cover the sky, I was trembling with fear. But then I thought, if the universe is that vast, then my daily worries are just grains of sand, and I felt lighter." Her simple words, born from personal experience, resonated more deeply than any scientific lecture. Artists, poets, and filmmakers joined in, weaving humanity's confusion into art. The documentary Silent Witness, Atlas and Us, shook audiences at the Venice Film Festival. It didn't just show footage of auroras, CME charts, or Novae data, but interviewed ordinary people. A child in Peru, an old man in Greece, an engineer in Japan. All of them spoke of Atlas, as though it were an invisible mirror, forcing them to confront their smallness and their ability to find meaning in ambiguity. The film ended with the line, "Sometimes the universe arranges itself like poetry. And poetry doesn't need an answer. Only a reader." On a global scale, governments and international organizations also learned a lesson. The Second Geneva Conference, held at the end of November, no longer revolved around the debate of coincidence or design. Instead, it focused on a different question. How do we live knowing that uncertainty is the essence of the universe? World leaders signed a joint declaration known as the Treaty of Humility, affirming that humanity must invest more in adaptability from space weather science to philosophy and the arts so that people may not only survive, but also live meaningfully in an unpredictable cosmos. And at a deeper level, within the collective unconscious, a shift had occurred. Instead of treating uncertainty as a threat, many began to see it as a companion. Just as darkness is necessary to see the light, ambiguity became the backdrop against which meaning emerged. The cosmic vigils continued, but now without fear. People sat quietly under the stars, lit candles, and smiled, accepting that some questions would forever remain suspended and that this, too, was part of the beauty. Atlas still drifted, still silent. Yet within that silence, humanity had changed. No longer panicking because they did not understand, they began to see value in not understanding. No longer clinging to a single definitive answer, they learned to listen to many echoes at once. And this shift from fear to contemplation may be the greatest gift Atlas had given. As 2024 drew to a close, a young philosopher wrote, "Perhaps the universe never sent us any message at all. But because of Atlas, we have written one for ourselves. Be humble, be curious, and be open-hearted." His words spread across the globe, becoming the motto of a generation that had just endured one of the most bewildering, yet most contemplative, months in human history. Late October 2024. While the echoes of the Geneva debate still lingered, the sky began to write a new chapter. Telescopes in Chile, Hawaii, and South Africa simultaneously recorded a phenomenon not seen in decades. A nova flaring in the constellation Aquila, so powerful it became visible to the naked eye. And in a strange, almost fated coincidence, the path of 3I Atlas happened to drift across the very region of space now lit by that eruption. The word nova sounds simple, almost gentle, but it hides one of the most spectacular explosions known to humanity. Unlike a supernova, which marks the death of a star, a nova is a temporary rebirth of a flame thought long extinguished. At its core is often a white dwarf, the dense, compact remnant of a star that has exhausted its fuel. Its size may only equal Earth's, yet its mass rivals the Sun's. A single teaspoon of its matter would weigh tons. This white dwarf is not alone. It clings to a stellar companion, and here begins the strange drama. Its immense gravity slowly siphons matter, mainly hydrogen, from its partner. Streams of molten plasma pour inward, wrapping around the dwarf in a dense shell. And within that deathly silence, an invisible spark ignites, a thermonuclear runaway. In that instant, part of the white dwarf surface detonates, releasing unimaginable energy. Within seconds, it radiates light equal to 100,000 suns. Imagine a silent city suddenly switching on every lamp at once, but this city is Earth-sized, and its fuel is the fire of a star. Humanity had read about novas in textbooks and seen them on charts, but this time they saw one with their own eyes. On late October nights, across Europe and Asia, people looked up and found a new star glowing strangely bright. Children asked their parents, "Where did it come from?" And parents, for once, had no answer beyond wonder. Atlas, still drifting silently, became an unwilling witness. It did not cause the eruption, nor could it change its course, but it passed through the region where nova light spilled across space. In humanity's imagination, Atlas was like an ancient traveler stumbling upon a cosmic volcano just as it erupted. It said nothing, yet its presence made the world shiver. Perhaps Atlas existed only to guide us here, to ensure that we saw a nova not as a formula, but with naked eyes filled with awe. The emotion that spread was overwhelming reverence, awe at the truth that a small, faded star could still unleash such ferocity. Reverence for an energy scale so immense it dwarfed imagination, making Earth feel like it stood before a stellar volcano of unimaginable size. And alongside that reverence came curiosity, surprise, and hunger for knowledge. People wanted to understand, to measure, to transform that burst of light into meaning. To grasp the true power of a nova, one must retrace the cycle step by step. At its heart lies a white dwarf, a stellar corpse compressed to an almost impossible density. Imagine a star once much like our Sun, burning hydrogen and helium for billions of years, until its fuel was exhausted and it collapsed. Instead of detonating as a supernova, it shrank into a sphere no wider than Earth but nearly as massive as the Sunday. Its matter was squeezed to near nuclear density, where a single teaspoon could weigh hundreds of tons. In that silence, the white dwarf became one of the most resilient objects in the universe, yet one that carried the seeds of future explosions. The miracle begins when the white dwarf is not alone. It often has a close companion star, typically a main sequence neighbor. The white dwarf's gravity is so intense that it gradually steals material from its partner. This process is called accretion. Matter, mostly hydrogen, is pulled into a steady stream, spiraling into a hot disk before raining down on the dwarf's surface. Over thousands, even millions of years, this thin shell of hydrogen grows thicker, like a bomb being packed grain by grain with explosive powder, with no one knowing exactly when it will ignite. And then, when the layer becomes dense enough, pressure and temperature at its base cross a critical threshold. Protons begin colliding, fusing in nuclear reactions. At first, the process is slow and stable. But like a spark dropped into a munitions depot, the reaction quickly spirals out of control. Scientists call it a thermonuclear runaway. In that instant, the entire hydrogen shell detonates. The energy released is staggering. The nova shines with a brilliance 100,000 times brighter than the sunday. To put it in perspective, if you gathered all the energy the sun emits in 10,000 years, the nova unleashes a comparable amount in just a few days. It is a volcano of energy, erupting not from Earth's crust, but from a distant sphere thousands of light-years away. What overwhelms humanity is not only the sheer power, but also the act of rebirth. The white dwarf is not destroyed by the nova. It merely sheds its outer layer, then begins accreting again, restarting the cycle. This can happen repeatedly, with novas erupting at intervals like a pulse in cosmic time, as if the universe were whispering, even when spent, there is still a chance to blaze again, not to endure forever, but to etch one more luminous mark in the darkness. Through telescopes, a nova appears as a star that emerges from nothing. To the naked eye, it is just a bright new point of light. But for those who understand the mechanism behind it, it is a humbling lesson. A delicate collision of pressure, temperature, and time can turn silence into a symphony of light. That is why the emotional response goes beyond reverence, becoming a hunger for knowledge. Scientists pore over spectral data, analyzing hydrogen Balmer lines, helium, and carbon to reconstruct the story within. Each bright or dark line in the spectrum is a message, a fragment of history sent across millennia. Yet alongside the precision of science, a philosopher wrote, "A nova is not only physics. It is the memory of a star, flaring at the edge of death to prove that beauty can bloom even from ashes. Have you not witchings not place?" Atlas, still drifting in silence, seemed to play the role of a witness. It did not erupt, it did not change, but its presence, aligned with the nova's blaze, gave the public a sense that an invisible thread connected them all. As though the universe had arranged it so humanity would not only witness the nova, but also see it through the eyes of Atlas. For the public, a nova may appear as a dazzling light show, but for scientists, it is a window into the universe's hidden codes. Each nova explosion functions like a colossal natural experiment, allowing humanity to observe phenomena impossible to recreate in any laboratory. From the spectral data collected in late October 2024, astronomers quickly identified critical signatures, the presence of ionized hydrogen, helium, carbon, and even traces of lithium, a rare element, yet crucial for understanding the primordial history of the cosmos. Lithium offers a striking example. For decades, cosmologists wrestled with the lithium problem. The Big Bang predicted far more lithium than telescopes had ever observed. Yet novas, with their ferocious nuclear reactions, are capable of forging new lithium. Observations in 2024 added fresh evidence that these explosions fill in the missing abundance, completing the chemical evolution chart of the universe. In other words, to look at a nova is not merely to witness a star ignite, but to see the fingerprints of the cosmos writing the periodic table itself. Nor does it end there. Novas also deepen our understanding of binary star evolution. These eruptions reveal how entangled the lives of white dwarfs and their companions truly are. One slowly siphons life from the other, while cycles of silence and detonation replay across cosmic time. From such rhythms, scientists can anticipate the path toward Type Ia supernovae, cosmic lighthouses used to measure galactic distances and to uncover the accelerating expansion of the universe. Through novas, humanity gains yet another clue in the grand puzzle of where the universe is headed. At this point, awe and reverence reach their zenith. From a single faint star, humanity can glimpse the fate of all creation. The fleeting blaze of a nova becomes a symbol inked across the heavens, a sign of cycles, of death and renewal, of a cosmos that is not pure chaos but instead pulses with structure and rhythm. Media outlets seized upon this imagery. Popular journals like Scientific American and Nature Astronomy ran headlines that electrified readers. Nova, the fireworks that write the universe's story. Explainer videos on YouTube drew hundreds of millions of views, blending animated renderings of white dwarfs, accretion disks, and nuclear fireballs with philosophers musing on the cosmic cycle of life and death. Never before had the world felt such a fusion of scientific curiosity and emotional wonder in response to an astronomical event. In classrooms, teachers used novas as living lessons in nuclear energy, in physics, laws, and in the boundaries of human knowledge itself. A teacher in Peru, interviewed for national television, said, "When my students see a nova with their own eyes, they understand that equations on the chalkboard are not empty symbols. They are keys to decoding that light." Her words spread across social media, proof that science is not just data, but a bridge transforming awe into knowledge. And throughout this vast tableau, Atlas remained a silent punctuation mark. It did not spark the nova, but its passage through the same cosmic stage gave many the sense that Atlas was an invisible narrator. It never spoke, but its quiet presence forced humanity to lift their gaze, to weigh its silence against the nova's roar. In that contrast, reverence expanded not only for the exploding star, but also for the interstellar traveler adrift nearby, as though both had joined together in a cosmic symphony. A nova is not only physical data, not also energy charts. It is also a philosophical symbol that forces humanity to pause and reflect. Behind that erupting plasma lies a familiar story. Something thought to be exhausted, thought to be dead, suddenly blazes again. In the eyes of philosophers and artists, the nova becomes a vivid metaphor for humanity itself, a fragile, finite species, yet always capable of igniting once more when pushed to its limits. Many began comparing the nova to the human life cycle. We too accumulate experiences, wounds, and desires until one moment when it all erupts into a defining instant, a decision, a discovery, an act that leaves a mark. Like a white dwarf, a person may live in silence, but when the moment comes, they flare, if only for a brief time to prove that they were here. Some philosophers took it further. They saw the nova as a lesson in fragility. Like humans, it is not eternal. It shines only for a few days or weeks before fading back into its old state. Its brevity is what makes it beautiful. Like a candle, its power lies in daring to burn, not to endure forever, but to leave behind an indelible memory. Several newspapers carried the haunting line, "Nova reminds us, brilliance is fragile, but fragility is also brilliance." At a deeper level, the nova stirred a hunger for knowledge. In that light, people saw their own smallness, but also felt compelled to reach higher. A 15-year-old student in Kenya wrote on her blog, "When I saw the nova, I knew the universe was bigger than my sadness, and I want to study astronomy so that one day I can understand it." Her simple words were shared by millions, because they captured the very impulse the cosmic light planted in human hearts, the desire to seek truth. Religions, too, wove their interpretations. For Christianity, it evoked resurrection. For Buddhism, it echoed the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. For indigenous traditions, it was seen as an ancestral flame lit across the night sky, reminding descendants of their roots. Though the languages differed, they all converged on the same point. The nova was a reminder that beauty can bloom again, even from ashes. In popular culture, the nova's image quickly became a fountain of inspiration. Painters created canvases, showing it as a colossal flower of fire blooming in space. Composers wrote symphonies titled Runaway Fire, mimicking accretion and explosion through pounding drums and resounding brass. In New York, an open-air concert drew hundreds of thousands who listened, with their eyes lifted skyward, as though the music was both a tribute to the nova and an act of self-reflection. And within all these interpretations, Atlas remained the silent storyteller. It did not erupt, did not blaze, but its passage through the nova's light made many feel as though it were a messenger. If the nova was the universe's thunderous drumbeat, Atlas was the pause between notes, the silence necessary for humanity to truly hear the music. It was this pairing, the brilliant roar on one side, the steadfast quiet on the other, that created such a powerful psychological effect. It compelled humanity to stand in awe of unimaginable energy, yet also awakened curiosity and longing. If a dying star can flare again, then perhaps we finite beings can discover new meaning within the very fragility of our existence. As November 2024 drew to a close, the nova gradually faded from the sky, its dazzling light surviving only in memory and in the data gathered by thousands of telescopes. Yet instead of vanishing, it left behind a legacy of knowledge that humanity would ponder for generations. The spectral lines, the accretion models, the streams of energy data all became treasures for science. Every number, every bright and dark band in the spectrum was a letter in the great book the universe had just written for humankind. In laboratories across the world, nuclear physicists pored over nova data to probe the mechanisms of element formation. They called it a cosmic laboratory, a place where nature itself conducts experiments no human facility could ever generate. Paper after paper was published, opening new horizons. By understanding the nova, we could not only unlock the secrets of white dwarfs but also trace the chemical evolution of entire galaxies. But the nova's legacy did not belong to science alone. It planted in people a renewed hunger for knowledge. Schools reported a surge in students enrolling in astronomy classes. Amateur star-watching events became community gatherings. A teacher in Chile remarked, "When my students saw the nova with their own eyes, they realized the sky was no longer distant. It was close, it touched their hearts." The nova transformed the heavens from an abstract concept into a living experience, and in doing so, it lit the flame of curiosity. On the philosophical level, the nova left a profound lesson. Light can burst forth from ashes. It reminded humanity that death is not always an ending. Sometimes it is a chance for a radiant rebirth. A Japanese philosopher wrote, "The nova teaches us the art of living. Live like that star, even when depleted, still blaze once more, leaving behind meaning beyond time." His words spread widely, becoming a mantra for millions in the wake of those turbulent months. Religions, too, joined the conversation. An interfaith council convened in Rome, where representatives of many traditions acknowledged the nova as a symbol of the meeting point between science and the sacred. Rather than debate, they agreed. This event was a reminder of humility and gratitude that the universe can both destroy and grant overwhelming beauty. On social media, images of Atlas drifting past the nova's light continued to circulate. Though only a coincidence, many embraced it as a dual symbol: Atlas the silence, Nova the explosion. One side reminded humanity of the endurance of quiet, the other awakened the yearning for renewal. Together, they left people awestruck, curious, and eager for the next hidden chapter the cosmos would unveil. Naturally, governments responded by investing more heavily in space research. Next-generation telescopes were approved, and international partnerships expanded. No one wanted to miss the universe's next symphony of light. Yet, at a deeper level, this drive was not merely conquest, it was a longing to understand, so that one day humankind might stand before the cosmos not only in awe but in comprehension. When Nova Aquilae finally dimmed, many felt a sense of emptiness. Yet within that emptiness lay a quiet gratitude. Humanity had been gifted a lesson that was both scientific and philosophical, that energy can blaze from ashes, that beauty can exist within transience, and that curiosity itself is the fuel that keeps us moving forward. And Atlas, the interstellar wanderer, kept drifting on. It offered no answers, no explanations, but its silence provided the backdrop to the nova's roar. Like a piece of music that needs its pauses, the universe used Atlas to remind humanity that silence and light always walk together. And when people learn to revere both, perhaps that will be the true beginning of a new age of understanding. December 2024. The nova had faded, the auroras had vanished, but the world could not breathe a sigh of relief. Instead, what lingered was a thick fog of unease. As the lights in the sky dimmed, the consequences on the ground began to surface. Reports from the United States, Europe, and Asia confirmed that modern infrastructure was still crippled in the wake of September's plasma storm. Dozens of communication satellites had been lost for good, throwing GPS signals off by hundreds of meters and directly disrupting aviation and maritime transport. In many regions, power grids remained unstable, forcing rolling blackouts to prevent overload. People felt as if they were living in a fragile age. In Tokyo, subway trains once punctual to the second frequently ground to a halt, leaving passengers waiting in darkness deep underground. In New York, nights of prolonged blackout turned Manhattan into a looming shadow, pierced only by the wail of ambulances, louder and more frequent than usual. In Cairo, erratic internet connections stalled financial transactions, sparking waves of panic on the stock exchange. Scientists called these invisible aftershocks. Unlike earthquakes or tempests, they did not strike loudly and then vanish. Instead, they seeped quietly into daily life, keeping society in a state of constant, low-grade tension. An energy engineer in Germany described it this way: "We're driving a car with a hidden engine failure. It still runs, but it could stall at any moment." Amid this atmosphere, Atlas continued its silent drift. No nova blazing beside it, no auroras unfurling across the sky, yet newspapers still spoke of it as a silent witness. In December skies, Atlas appeared only as a faint smudge through telescopes, and that very faintness unsettled people even more. It felt like an uninvited guest at humanity's table, lingering at the edge, watching without a word. And its silence only deepened the anxiety. What other events might it be carrying in its wake? The dominant emotions of this period were unease and strain. Gone were the dazzling explosions, the violent storms of light. What remained was a fragile quiet, one that frightened people more than thunder. Every time a street lamp flickered, they wondered, was it just faulty wiring or some signal from the cosmos? Every time a cell phone lost service, the irritation carried an undertone of dread, a reminder that the modern world balanced precariously on hidden fault lines. Alongside the fear came warnings and compassion, warnings from scientists who stressed that this was not the last event, that other storms, other disruptions, would surely follow. And compassion for the people of Anatolia, still sleeping in makeshift tents after the earthquake, now bracing for a brutal winter without enough electricity to keep warm. The combination of warning and compassion weighed heavily. Humanity was confronting not only the vastness of the cosmos, but also the fragility within its own foundations. By the second week of December 2024, governments around the world began announcing sweeping emergency measures. From Washington to Brussels, from Tokyo to New Delhi, one phrase dominated the headlines: global blackout drills. The world had never faced such an exercise before. The assumption that entire power grids could collapse within hours, even days, under the next wave of plasma storms or geomagnetic aftershocks. In the United States, FEMA staged its largest operation in history. Major cities deliberately shut off electricity for several hours to test hospitals, transportation, and emergency communications. In New York, residents poured into the streets, watching skyscrapers go dark until all of Manhattan seemed swallowed by a colossal shadow. Many posted on social media, "This isn't science fiction anymore, this is survival training." In Europe, the EU launched Operation Aurora Shield, a cross-border blackout scenario. Nations shared backup power lines, fuel reserves, and even military satellites. Yet rather than reassurance, it fueled public anxiety. Non-stop broadcasts about the risk of a global blackout emptied grocery shelves in Paris and Berlin within hours. People fought over candles, batteries, and bottled water. Fear spread faster than electricity itself. Across Asia, Japan and South Korea announced dark day drills, turning off all streetlights for 24 hours to test readiness. Tokyo plunged into eerie darkness, lit only by the faint glow of the moon. An elderly woman, trembling, told a reporter, "It feels like wartime again, when we had to hide in the dark, afraid of bombs." Old memories resurfaced, layering the unease of the present with the shadows of the past. Meanwhile, scientists continued to issue warnings. NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center reported that the solar cycle was heading toward peak activity, and the next CME could easily surpass September's storm. Geologists released maps of seismic hotspots, fault zones primed for chain earthquakes. Each report, instead of calming fears, deepened the tension. Humanity felt surrounded by threats from both the sky above and the ground beneath. On social media, hashtags like #NextBlackout and #Atlas Silent Witness spread like wildfire. Users shared blurred images of Atlas against the December night, captioned, "It's watching us rehearse for the real darkness." A lump of ice and rock drifting through space had been transformed by human imagination into a silent spectator of civilization's anxieties. Beneath all these drills and precautions, however, a deeper emotion surfaced: compassion. Because not every place can afford rehearsals or backup systems. In Syria, Yemen, and parts of Africa, blackouts were not a hypothetical scenario but a daily reality. People there watched the global debate with a bitter smile. You fear the end of the world without electricity. For us, that is just life. The line went viral, leaving many in wealthier nations silent and shaken. Suddenly, fear and compassion blended, turning this crisis into a mirror, reflecting global inequality. By the end of each day, when the lights came back on after the drills, relief was not what people felt. Instead, tension deepened, because they had learned a simple truth: light can vanish at any moment. And when it does, it is not just infrastructure that collapses, but society's trust itself. If blackout drills revealed the fragility of infrastructure, then the daily lives of billions became the clearest testimony to the tension and anxiety humanity now carries. Every sector, medicine, agriculture, finance, education, was directly shaken by the instability of the cosmos. In hospitals, surgeries delayed by sudden outages became haunting stories. In Mexico City, a news report captured nurses using the flashlights on their phones to illuminate an operating room during a blackout. The patient survived, but the image spread across social media, stirring a wave of compassion. If a stronger CME strikes, how many lives will hang on the fragile glow of a phone screen? In war zones like Gaza or Sudan, where healthcare was already collapsing, the spectre of prolonged blackouts was no abstract scenario, it was a daily terror. In agriculture, dependence on technology amplified unease. In the US, farmers worried that if GPS errors persisted, automated harvesters and seed planters would run off course, wasting entire fields. In India, rice farmers who had come to rely on digital weather forecasts found themselves planting by instinct, as their ancestors once did, after satellite signals failed. One journalist wrote, "The plasma storm did not stop the rice from sprouting, but it made human hands tremble as they dropped the seeds into the soil." In economics, global markets grew more fragile than ever. Internet disruptions halted stock trading repeatedly, causing billions of dollars in losses within hours. Economists warned that a single powerful CME could wipe trillions off the global market in a day. But for ordinary people, fear was not measured in vast numbers, but in lived moments. ATMs frozen, stores demanding cash only, migrant workers unable to wire money home. These small breakdowns laid bare the fragility of a society that once prided itself on digital strength. Education was not spared. Online classes in Africa were disrupted, cutting off millions of students from lessons. In Europe, some universities reverted to chalk and blackboard when projectors and laptops lost their network. A teacher in Greece sighed, "We are raising the generation of AI, yet a single CME can throw them back into the 20th century." In the whiter lines, a line bright, in the presser, in the whiter light, threaded through the global picture were intimate, personal stories that carried a heavier weight than statistics. In Istanbul, a family still living in a tent after the earthquake faced another winter without electricity. A mother clutched her child under blankets and whispered to a reporter, "We are not afraid of the dark, we are afraid of being forgotten." In Canada, an elderly man wept because he could not call his son working abroad when the mobile network went down. In Kenya, a group of school children studied by candlelight, looking up at the sky where Atlas drifted silently, and wrote in their journals, "If that star can travel so far in the dark, maybe we can too." The wave hulls of eyes and the commutations, .1, and the chasing grows, and the time, entrossings of lack. These small stories rippled outward, becoming a wave of shared emotion. The crisis was no longer measured by cold numbers in reports, but by disrupted lives that touched hearts everywhere. That was what made anxiety spread wider and deeper than any scientific warning. Science continued issuing bulletins and alerts, but the public increasingly viewed the crisis through a human lens. This was no longer just a test of technology. It was a test of connection, of whether people could still care for one another in a fragile and uncertain world. Amid the landscape of unease, a new wave began to rise: adaptation. Governments, communities, and individuals were forced to change the way they lived, as if preparing for a new era where uncertainty was no longer the exception but the rule. In the United States, Congress passed the Solar Shield Act, channeling hundreds of billions of dollars into strengthening the power grid against solar storms. Utility companies were ordered to replace fragile transformers and build emergency reserves of critical equipment. Lawmakers proudly declared this an electric shield for the nation. Yet journalists reminded the public that all such measures were temporary at best. One scientist wrote, "We cannot build a wall against the Sunday. We can only learn how to bow before it storms." In Europe, many cities launched the Dark Resilience Initiative, urging citizens to store candles, batteries, and clean water, while teaching basic survival skills. Images of families in Berlin and Paris cooking over wood stoves in public parks. Some mocked it as a return to the Stone Age, but others found comfort in it. At least they would not be alone in the dark. In Asia, Japan went further, weaving astronomy and disaster preparedness into school curricula. Students were taught to read the sky, recognize auroras, and understand CMEs. One teacher explained, "If children know the sun can destroy their phones, they will also understand that the sun is the reason we exist at all." Anxiety can transform into reverence. In India, villages set up radio hubs using shortwave transmitters backup lifelines for the day the internet might vanish entirely. Civil society also sought to adapt. Non-profits launched the Light for All campaign, distributing solar lamps to impoverished regions without reliable electricity. Images of African children studying under the glow of a single solar light moved the world. One journalist wrote, "Perhaps global anxiety has unintentionally planted seeds of compassion. In the dark, we learn to share light." At the personal level, many adjusted their daily habits. Families stocked dry goods, bought small generators, and learned how to purify water manually. Online forums are filled with survival guides titled "How to Live Without Power." Yet alongside preparation came reflection. People began questioning their dependence on technology. "Do we still remember how to live if the internet disappears tomorrow?" they asked. Through it all, Atlas drifted silently, a shadow reminding humanity that its preparations were only patchwork against the immensity of the cosmos. Newspapers echoed the sentiment, "Atlas neither gives us electricity nor takes it away. It only watches us stumble in the dark." The image haunted many, yet it also stirred a deeper humility. The dominant emotions remained anxiety and tension because no one knew what tomorrow would bring. Yet beneath that layer, subtler currents emerged, warnings that the world could no longer dismiss its fragility, and compassion, as people witnessed the most vulnerable communities bearing the heaviest burdens. Together, these feelings created a paradoxical atmosphere, both heavy and profoundly human. A planet trembling, yet learning to hold itself together to endure. As 2024 drew to a close, the world entered a strange state. Life went on as usual, yet beneath the surface, a heavy fog of unease lingered. On the surface, supermarkets stayed open, buses still rolled through the streets, and airports remained in operation. But underneath, billions of people carried an unspoken fear that everything could vanish in an instant, the moment the universe decided to flip a switch. Sociologists called it a collective anxiety field. It spread not through geomagnetic waves or streams of plasma, but through glances, conversations, and the endless cascade of messages on social media. When a child asked his father, "Will the power go out tomorrow?" the father reassured him, but carried worry in his own eyes. When a bank worker tested an ATM, he still feared it might shut down without warning. When a farmer scattered seeds into the soil, she wondered, would this year's harvest still depend on satellites, or had that trust already been broken? The frightening part was that this anxiety could branch into two paths. One path led to collective action, cooperation, sharing, and strengthening resilience to survive together. The other led to chaos, selfish hoarding, panic, and the collapse of trust. Humanity stood at that crossroads, unsure of which way to turn. Leaders issued warnings but also feared their words might backfire. As one analyst wrote, "We are walking a tightrope of fear. If we say too little, people won't prepare. If we say too much, society may unravel in panic." Against that backdrop, compassion began to rise as a counterforce. Fundraising, aid campaigns, and acts of solidarity spread rapidly. In New Zealand, citizens donated small generators to families in Turkey. In Canada, people sent solar lamps to schools in Africa, and in a refugee camp in Syria, a child held up a small light and scrawled on the tent wall, "Atlas is watching." The photo brought the world to tears. It reminded everyone that while fear could divide, compassion could bind. Through all of this, Atlas drifted silently across the heavens. It did not unleash solar storms. It did not ignite novas. It did not sabotage humanity's fragile infrastructure. Yet people had made it into a symbol, the silent witness. And it's very silent, sharpening humanity's sense of dread. Because when a celestial body refuses to speak, it forces civilization to confront its own question. Do we have the strength to endure in an indifferent universe? Philosophers describe this as a collective existential moment. A nameless block of interstellar ice and rock 3I Atlas had compelled an entire civilization to look inward. It offered no answers, but its presence was enough to push humanity into reflection, preparation, and vigilance. The fear was no longer just about the darkness out there, but the darkness within the fragility of dependence. The weight of vulnerability, the possibility of losing trust itself. December ended with Christmas lights glittering in the cities, town squares glowing once more with music and festivals. Yet beneath that brightness, no one could forget the shadow that had only recently fallen. And that was the paradox of the Atlas era. Humanity could laugh, sing, and live as though nothing had changed, while at the same time trembling before a universe always ready to test them again. The conclusion from scientists was stark. There is no way to guarantee absolute safety, but there is one way to reduce the damage: global cooperation. Simple words, yet heavy with meaning. They echoed as the final reminder of the year, both a warning and a promise, that collective anxiety, if transformed into action, could become the very strength that might save civilization. And Atlas, still just a faint dot on the night sky, reminded humanity that they were only a fragment in the great cosmic play. A small fragment, yes, but if united, perhaps enough to write the next chapter of the story. Early January 2025. The world had just stumbled past the old year in a haze of unease, still reeling from blackout drills and fragile infrastructure. Humanity barely had time to exhale when the sky hurled down another omen, one more terrifying than anything before. From solar observatories in Hawaii, the Canary Islands, and even Antarctica, the solar flux index, the measure of radio emission at 10.7 centimeters, suddenly spiked. The number leapt from a safe 110 to 350 units, the highest in more than 2 decades. For the untrained eye, it was just data. For the scientific community, it was a red siren. The sun was stirring like a restless giant. Almost immediately, ultraviolet telescopes recorded a swarm of sunspots crawling across the solar surface. Each one spanned 3 times Earth's diameter, churning like vast whirlpools on an ocean of fire. From these unstable scars, coronal mass ejections, CME, erupted in violent succession. Imagine billions of tons of superheated plasma hurled into space at over 2,000 kilometers per second, dragging colossal twisted magnetic fields in their wake. In 3D simulations, they looked like spheres of fire unfurling, coiling, and then flung into the void, and this time, the trajectory of 1 CME pointed straight at Earth. Noah wasted no time. The geomagnetic storm alert rose to G5 extreme, the maximum on the KP scale. Scientists tried to explain in metaphors ordinary people could grasp. If Earth were a musical instrument, this strike would make the whole planet ring like a massive drum. The image chilled the public. The Earth, long assumed to be firm and stable, now seemed fragile, a sphere trembling on the brink of an invisible blow from the heavens. Tension spread quickly across the globe. Airlines cancelled or rerouted hundreds of flights over polar routes to avoid the surge of ionizing radiation. Telecom corporations held emergency meetings, drafting scenarios for mass satellite failures. Stock markets reacted instantly. The Nasdaq plunged over 3% in a single day, as technology giants braced for catastrophic losses if the orbital web of satellites went silent. But what unsettled ordinary people even more was the wildfire spread of information. Within 24 hours, searches for magnetic storm multiplied tenfold. Explainer videos racked up tens of millions of views, comments pouring in. Will my phone be fried? Is my pacemaker safe? Could the internet vanish forever? The storm was no longer just a scientific event, it had seeped into daily fear. Meanwhile, far beyond, the interstellar traveler 3I Atlas continued its silent drift. Its path overlapped with the expanding plasma field, launched from the Sunday for Atlas. It was nothing, just ice and rock gliding through the dark. But for humanity, the image of Atlas crossing a storm of the unseen became a haunting metaphor. A cold witness floating through magnetic chaos, while humans could only watch from afar. Headlines screamed, "Atlas walks through the tempest while humanity trembles below." The emotions sweeping across the planet were a blend of terror and suspense. Terror, because a celestial body, millions of kilometers away, could still unleash energies powerful enough to cripple an electronic civilization. Suspense, because everyone knew the impact was coming, yet no one could predict its scale. It was like watching a tsunami, hundreds of meters high, rushing toward shore. You knew it was inevitable, but not how violently it would break. Beneath this fear ran other undercurrents. Curiosity, as scientists were thrilled at the chance to capture data from one of the strongest geomagnetic storms in modern times. Excitement, because humanity might finally glimpse the deeper workings of Earth's magnetic shield. But above all, a paralyzing dread. In the instant when plasma collided with the magnetosphere, civilization could lose everything it thought. Untouchable electricity, the internet, satellites, and the fragile illusion of control. The 7th of January 2025, the countdown clocks in forecasting centers around the world hit zero. And then, the impact arrived. A colossal CME, unleashed from sunspot AR3590 on the solar surface, struck Earth. There was no sound, no immediate flash of light. But in the upper atmosphere, the magnetosphere shuddered. Within minutes, the entire planet seemed gripped by an invisible hand, squeezed inside magnetic chaos. Magnetometers spiked off the charts, the KP index slamming straight to 9, the maximum possible reading. In Alaska, electric field monitors went wild, dials spinning as if torn apart. A scientist in Fairbanks gasped on a live broadcast, "We are in the eye of the storm. This is the strongest geomagnetic event since Carrington, 1859. And then the sky exploded into a surreal spectacle. Auroras erupted not just in high latitudes but cascaded down to Florida, Texas, even Cairo and Mumbai. For the first time in living memory, people saw their hometown skies transform into curtains of green, crimson, and violet, twisting and unfurling. Bands of light poured downward like rivers, dazzling yet ominous. A man in Mexico wrote online, "It's breathtakingly beautiful, but I don't know if I'm watching a miracle or the end of the world." On the ground, infrastructure groaned under the strain. Hundreds of satellites lost signal, some completely blacked out. GPS drifted by hundreds of meters, forcing aircraft and ships to revert to manual navigation. In Canada, overloaded transformers blew in sequence, plunging millions into freezing darkness. In Sweden, mobile networks collapsed nationwide, leaving citizens queuing at the few public payphones still functional. The first minutes after impact plunged the world into tense suspense. News channels aired live footage of majestic auroras spliced with blackout scenes, traffic chaos, and crowds surging into shops for candles, batteries, and food. Analysts sat before cameras, voices trembling with both awe and dread. We are witnessing the largest natural experiment in modern history, but if it continues, it could escalate into a global catastrophe. Panic rippled across societies. In New York, thousands gathered in Times Square to watch a blood-red sky shimmer above, while giant LED billboards flickered and then went black. In Japan, Shinkansen bullet trains screeched to unscheduled halts mid-journey as their control systems faltered. In South Africa, Johannesburg residents saw auroras for the first time, their initial wonder quickly collapsing into fear when the internet went dark nationwide. Meanwhile, Atlas drifted silently at the outer edge of the plasma wave that had battered Earth. Astronomers managed to capture faint images of it, just a lone speck of light, framed by a magnetically distorted sky. Newspapers instantly labeled it the traveler through the storm, a cold witness gliding where humanity could only tremble from below. Its silence, set against the frenzy on Earth, made the vision even more haunting. The dominant emotions across the planet were terror and suspense. Terror, because everything modern life depends on electricity. Networks, satellites could vanish within minutes. Suspense, because no one knew how long the shock would last, or whether more CMEs were already racing toward Earth. In the upturned eyes reflecting the blazing auroras, the light carried more than beauty. It carried the realization that the universe had just proven a brutal truth. Humanity's electronic civilization was more fragile than ever imagined. As the solar storm moved past its first wave, the world began to feel its lasting aftermath. No longer the dazzling auroras, but charred power lines, scrambled telecom networks, and systems once thought secure now lay bare in frightening fragility. In North America, Quebec's grid collapsed almost entirely. Citizens endured days without electricity in the bitter cold, and hospitals were overwhelmed with hypothermia cases. Across Europe, online banking services froze as satellite errors piled up, leaving millions of transactions suspended. Long queues formed at the few ATMs still functioning, as people feared their savings might vanish into meaningless digits on dark screens. In South America, patchy internet crippled agricultural weather forecasting systems, leaving farmers to sow crops in a haze of uncertainty. In healthcare, the toll was even more distressing. Medical devices dependent on GPS synchronization began to fail. Pacemakers issued urgent alerts for checks, sending panic through families with elderly patients. At a hospital in Sweden, surgeons were forced to postpone operations when cardiac monitors could no longer be trusted. One physician wrote in a newspaper, "For the first time in my career, I had to ask, can we trust our machines, or must we rely only on our hands and our eyes?" The global economy trembled. Stock prices for telecom, airline and energy companies plunged. Tokyo's market lost over 1,000 points in a single morning, while Wall Street suffered its most chaotic day since the 2008 crisis. Experts warned, if the geomagnetic storm lasted several more days, damages could soar into the trillions. But for ordinary people, such numbers were abstract shadows. What mattered was simple: lights that would not turn on, internet that would not connect, and phones that had become lifeless bricks. Yet amid this chaos, the scientific community felt a strangely opposite current: curiosity and exhilaration. For the first time in decades, they had real-time data from a peak-level geomagnetic storm. Magnetometers from Greenland to Antarctica poured in terabytes of readings. Graphs of magnetic fluctuations revealed shocks stronger than anything previously recorded. Science satellites like ACE and DSCOVR tracked plasma streams denser and faster than forecasts had dared predict. A NASA scientist exclaimed, "This is the first time we've truly seen Earth tremble inside its own magnetic field." Biomedical researchers seized the moment to study human impacts. Sensors placed on volunteers across countries recorded spikes in heart rate, disrupted sleep, and stress hormone surges during the storm. Some doctors posed new questions. Does the human body synchronize, at least in part, with Earth's magnetic field? And if so, does this mean the sun can directly shape our emotions and mental health? This excitement could not erase the fear, but it created a paradox. While society panicked, science glimpsed a golden chance to deepen humanity's grasp of the cosmos. Media outlets dubbed it the dual emotion, on one side, terror, on the other, an insatiable drive to discover. And between these two extremes drifted Atlas, a silent shadow gliding through the storm-scorched void, reminding humanity it was merely a small observer in a cosmic drama scripted by the universe itself. The global mood became a rare fusion, terror and suspense intertwined with curiosity and exhilaration. Terror, because modern infrastructure proved more fragile than ever. Suspense, because no one knew how powerful the next CME might be. Curiosity and exhilaration, because never before had science been handed a front-row seat to a natural experiment spanning the entire planet. As the geomagnetic storm subsided by the end of the second week of January 2025, Earth had not collapsed, but the scars it left would linger long after. Cities gradually restored power, satellites slowly regained signal, and stock markets limped back to life. Yet in the memory of billions, the moment when the sky exploded with auroras and phone screens went dark all at once, carved an indelible mark. For the first time in generations, humanity truly felt the raw fragility of the electronic civilization it had built. Experts called it the civilization stress test. Not war, not an economic crash, but the sun itself, the very star that gives us life, had turned into a raging giant, testing every layer of our technological shell. Damage reports estimated losses in the hundreds of billions of dollars, but the numbers mattered less than the revelation that a geomagnetic storm, invisible and silent, could shake every illusion of permanence we held about the modern world. In emergency summits, leaders of nations had to swallow a bitter truth. There is no shield strong enough to block the Sunday. Programs like Solar Shield or Aurora Shield could soften the blow, but they could never erase the risk. A European lawmaker admitted bluntly at a press conference, "We have built our civilization on sand. A gust of solar wind can sweep away every illusion of technological eternity." The word spread widely, quoted across thousands of articles, leaving the public both chilled and strangely validated. Yet within that existential dread flickered another light: the lesson of humility. Philosophers called it the cosmic reminder. Humanity had grown accustomed to control. We flip a switch, the lights turn on. We press a button, the internet appears. But the storm revealed that behind all convenience lies a force so immense it is forever beyond us. And only when confronted with that helplessness did we begin to grasp the truth. We are but a fragile thread woven into a vast cosmic web. Atlas, as always, drifted silently on. It had not caused the storm, nor had it been scarred by plasma. But never before had its image been invoked so often. People began calling it the silent witness, As human systems faltered and skies burned with auroras, Atlas kept its trajectory undisturbed. That indifference turned it into a symbol, proof that the universe does not revolve around us, and that what we call apocalypse is, to it, no more than a passing ripple. On social media, millions shared a single message: "We are fragile." Atlas reminds us. A now iconic image taken from a Chilean telescope captured the blood-red aurora draping the sky, while Atlas lingered as a tiny dot in the corner. The photo became a global emblem, the sun's chaotic fury set against the frozen silence of an icy wanderer. In it, people saw both fear and awakening. The emotion of this phase was a layered blend. Terror and suspense, mingled with curiosity, exhilaration, and unease at the sheer scale of cosmic influence. But unlike in the storm's first days, fear had shifted from blind panic into something colder, more contemplative. People began to ask, if a single storm could shake us this badly, what would happen with something greater, a new Carrington event, or worse? No answer existed, yet those questions transformed dread into fuel for science, resilience, and preparation. By the end of January, humanity knew it had survived a near-fatal blow, but also understood this would not be the last. And within the collective memory, Main Idea 8 left a searing imprint. We live in an unsafe universe, and the fragility of our electronic civilization is exposed whenever the sun decides to rage. Atlas, still gliding wordlessly across the heavens, lingered as a faint dot in the cosmic symphony, reminding us that the next chapter of this story remains unwritten. March 2025. As humanity was still limping out of the chaos of the geomagnetic storm earlier that year, a new wave of emotion began to rise. This time, it was not fear or anxiety, but anticipation and scientific wonder. For astronomy was about to witness an encounter unlike anything in history. The interstellar traveler, 3I Atlas, the mysterious visitor that had shaken the world for months, was about to sweep past Mars. The press and social media quickly gave the event a romantic nickname, a blind date between an interstellar guest and Mars. This was no scenario of collision or destruction. Atlas's orbit had been calculated with precision. It would cross near Mars at a safe distance, but close enough to become an invaluable natural experiment. The orbiters circling Mars would have a once-in-a-lifetime chance to record direct data, surface structure, the composition of its icy dust, even the plasma traces Atlas might leave behind as it brushed against the solar wind. For the scientific community, this was a dream, a celestial body born outside the solar system, carrying secrets as old as the universe itself, passing by the planet humanity has long yearned to walk upon. The atmosphere inside global research centers grew thick with anticipation. In Pasadena, the JPL control room stayed lit through the night. Engineers fine-tuned the trajectory of the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, ensuring the high-rise camera could capture even the tiniest details as Atlas drifted by. Maven is prepared to measure plasma fluctuations, while ESA's ExoMars TGO is lined up for spectroscopic scans, hoping to catch traces of dust as Atlas brushes the Martian skies. In Darmstadt, Germany, ESA's mission control set up a war room filled with massive screens, displaying 3D simulations of Atlas's orbit, cutting across the red planet's gravitational reach. In Japan, the Subaru telescope and ALMA were granted top priority, ready to beam live coverage to the entire world. In Chile, astronomers at Paranal prepared for their biggest observation campaign since the Great Hale-Bopp comet of 1997. Across continents, ordinary people rushed to buy amateur telescopes, eager to become eyewitnesses to this cosmic rendezvous. On social media, the hashtag number Mars Encounter erupted. Within days, hundreds of millions of posts appeared by scientists, students, and everyday dreamers. The global atmosphere felt like a countdown to an Olympic Games of the cosmos. Yet unlike sports, this was not a contest between nations, but a collective celebration, a planetary festival where all eyes turned skyward, waiting for a historic moment. Articles compared the event to other milestones in scientific history. Galileo first glimpsing Jupiter's moons, Voyager sending back the image of Earth as a pale blue dot, or Curiosity's landing on Mars. But this time, humanity was not the conqueror. We were the audience, handed a rare ticket to watch the universe itself write a new chapter. A distant traveler, brushing close to the red planet. The world we've dreamed of reaching for generations. The dominant emotions were expectation and scientific curiosity. Researchers asked, could Atlas harbor unknown organic compounds? If its dust that drifted into the Martian atmosphere, might it leave chemical traces pointing toward the origins of life? Could this be the opportunity to compare interstellar material with the soil and ice samples Mars missions are preparing to return? Each question added to the suspense, as if the whole planet was seated in a theater, waiting for the curtain to rise. Secondary emotions also surged: suspense and a sense of history. Suspense, because everything hinged on a few short hours, as Atlas skimmed past Mars. If the weather turned bad, or instruments failed, humanity might lose the most precious data in decades. And the sense of history, because one day, when children open their astronomy textbooks, there will be a chapter that reads, "In March 2025, humanity witnessed the encounter between 3I Atlas and Mars." In this moment, Atlas shifted its symbolic role once again. It was no longer the dark omen casting anxiety during solar storms, but the silent storyteller of the cosmos, carrying mysteries from realms no one had ever reached, passing by the red planet to ignite humanity's thirst for knowledge. And at last, after months of fear, humanity lifted its gaze to the sky, not to tremble, but to wait, with hearts pounding, hopeful, expectant, alive with wonder. To prepare for what was called a blind date of the cosmos, humanity orchestrated its efforts down to the smallest detail. From orbiters circling Mars to telescopes scattered across Earth, an entire interplanetary web of observation came alive, as though an entire civilization were tilting its head upward to watch a silent guest step onto the stage. High above the red planet, the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, MRO, adjusted the angle of its high-rise camera, the most powerful ever sent into space, ready to capture close-up images of Atlas as it swept past. Engineers at JPL calculated exposure times down to the millisecond, knowing Atlas was moving so quickly that the slightest miscalculation would blur it into a meaningless streak. Meanwhile, the MAVEN spacecraft focused on plasma readings, hoping to record the interaction between Atlas's dust and Mars's thin atmosphere. If any charge exchange occurred, this would be humanity's first direct glimpse of an interstellar body touching a planet within the solar system. ESA was equally invested. The ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter, TGO, scheduled infrared scans to search for rare gases that Atlas might carry. Some scientists speculated that if its icy dust contained organic compounds, Mars's atmosphere could briefly glow at unusual wavelengths. Just a few minutes of observation could yield data powerful enough to reshape our understanding of interstellar chemistry. On Earth, the network of observatories stretched from Mauna Kea in Hawaii to Alma in Chile, from Gran Telescopio Canarias to the South African observatories, all synchronized to international time, all aimed at a single pinpoint where Atlas's orbit would graze Mars's path. Scientists described it as a global symphony of telescopes, the eyes of humanity joining in chorus to capture one fleeting cosmic moment. International media transformed the event into a festival. Television networks set up live countdown stages. In New York's Times Square, a massive LED screen displayed Atlas's trajectory as a thin, glowing thread sweeping across Mars. In Tokyo, crowds gathered at Shibuya Crossing to watch JAXA's livestream, while in Nairobi, a university hosted a community viewing, students sharing battered binoculars and small telescopes. Across the world, millions stood under the same sky, waiting, as if history itself were about to turn a page written in cosmic dust. The prevailing mood was not fear. It felt more like a celebration of discovery. In Berlin, an artist painted a giant mural, Atlas personified as a cloaked wanderer of ice, meeting Mars, fiery red, like a dancer stepping onto the stage. In Brazil, musicians composed Dance of Dust and Fire, a tango of the cosmos inspired by the encounter. Online, memes spread like wildfire, jokingly calling Atlas the interstellar traveler searching for its first love. And yet, woven through the laughter and art was a strand of tension. Scientists reminded the world this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Atlas would not return. After its brief encounter, it would drift forever into interstellar night. If technical failure struck a camera glitch or a Martian dust storm veiling the view, the priceless data would vanish with it. A Japanese astronomer told a reporter, "This is history. Either we capture it, or it disappears into the void, never to come again." The 70. Through all of humanity's anticipation, Atlas remained what it had always been, a cold, indifferent point of light, gliding steadily along its path, untroubled by the noise below. Its silence made the moment heavier. It offered no promise, no signal, no warning. It simply passed by. And yet, because of that very indifference, its presence gathered the gaze of an entire species, from NASA engineers, squinting at control screens, to a child in Africa, clutching a second-hand telescope, each heart beating faster, waiting for the curtain to rise on the blind date between Atlas and Mars. The 16th of March 2025. The countdown clocks on giant screens across the globe struck zero. In the hours that followed, humanity would witness what had been dubbed a blind date between Atlas and Mars. Observatories, orbiters, and telescopes were fully primed. And as Atlas drifted through the gravitational reach of the red planet, the world entered a moment of breathless anticipation, one destined to carry historical weight. From Martian orbit, the MRO transmitted the first images, an elongated body, cloaked in ice and dust, reflecting the sun's pale light. High-rise captured details so sharp that fissures could be seen scarring its surface, places where ice appeared to sublimate directly into vapor. Inside JPL's control room, engineers burst into applause. Some even wept. No one had dared imagine they might one day see an interstellar visitor this closely. Meanwhile, Maven registered strange plasma signals. As Atlas's dust tail brushed across Mars's upper atmosphere, sensors recorded intense ionization. A faint halo shimmered briefly around the planet, a sudden, ghostly crown. One scientist gasped, "This is history unfolding. We've just witnessed Mars being touched by interstellar debris." Data streamed back to Earth in real time, and social media erupted with dazzling visualizations. The red planet draped in a temporary veil of silver dust, a fleeting gift from a traveler born beyond the sun's domain. ESA's ExoMars TGO contributed its own revelations. Infrared spectra revealed traces of cyanide and small amounts of formaldehyde within Atlas's tail. Not evidence of life, but a crucial clue in the great puzzle. How might organic compounds be seeded across worlds by interstellar guests? Scientists revived discussions of panspermia, the provocative hypothesis that life could be seeded from the stars, and the idea blazed anew across headlines. On television, one professor reflected, "Perhaps Atlas is only a passerby. Yet in its passing, it has left us fragments to read, sentences written in dust and gas." Back on Earth, telescopes such as ALMA and Subaru reported changes in Atlas's brightness as it neared Mars. Light curves suggested sudden outgassing. Perhaps the red planet's gravity tugged at Atlas's crust, fracturing it. Fragments of matter streamed outward, stretching into a plume tens of thousands of kilometers long, a translucent scarf wrapping around Mars. Journalists wasted no time. Mars receives a cosmic scarf? Read poetic headlines. For the global audience watching live, the emotions were universal. Curiosity, suspense, and the dizzying sense of bearing witness to history. In Times Square, crowds erupted when the first close-up images appeared on the colossal screen. In Tokyo, passers-by stopped in Shibuya Crossing, gazes fixed on glowing billboards, applauding as though watching fireworks. In Kenya, students shouted with joy as their modest telescope caught a faint streak trailing Mars. Everywhere, whispers rose in awe. We just saw history. And through it all, Atlas sailed on, unaware it had become the centerpiece of one of humanity's most observed moments. It made no promises, offered no explanations. It simply passed by. Yet, its silence magnified human longing, amplifying both scientific curiosity and existential wonder. For if a single close encounter could yield so much data, so many questions, how many secrets lay hidden in the countless other interstellar bodies drifting unseen through the void? As Atlas drifted farther away, leaving Mars's orbit behind, the world sank into an unusual silence. No more countdown clocks, no more cheering crowds, only torrents of raw data flowing back from orbiters and telescopes. Yet within that silence, a single truth crystallized. Humanity had just witnessed an event of cosmic significance. Scientists dove into analysis, and every line of data opened a new chapter. Spectra from TGO confirmed the presence of simple organic compounds, strengthening the theory that interstellar bodies can transport the raw building blocks of life. Plasma readings from Maven revealed unprecedented details of how Atlas's dust and gases interacted with Mars's atmosphere, leaving a temporary imprint in its ionosphere. And the high-rise images so sharp they revealed tiny fissures across Atlas's surface, were instantly compared to Galileo's first sketches of Jupiter's moons, imperfect, yet powerful enough to change humanity's view of the cosmos forever. The global media roared with headlines: "History written in dust and orbits, Mars and Atlas, a cosmic blind date etched forever." In parks and public squares, people lingered long after, still talking in awe. A teacher in Peru told her students, "Today, you did not just study astronomy. You lived inside a lesson written by the universe itself." Her words spread widely, becoming a symbol of the moment. The dominant emotions were expectation and scientific curiosity, but they now mingled with something deeper: existential pride. Humanity realized that, fragile and small as it may be, it could still stretch its vision into interstellar space, still capture the fleeting light of a traveler from the beyond. The secondary emotion, suspense, the thrill of history, transformed into something steadier: conviction. An entire generation would forever remember that they had lived through the day Atlas brushed past Mars. In emergency scientific conferences, debates grew lively. Some emphasized that Atlas's data would sharpen our understanding of planetary system formation. Others leaned toward panspermia, suggesting that life on Earth itself might owe its origin to such interstellar visitors. Opinions diverged, but consensus rang clear. Atlas had opened a new doorway to knowledge, one that humanity would spend decades unlocking. Yet the impact went beyond science. Philosophers, artists, and ordinary citizens felt themselves changed. In Rome, a cathedral held a prayer service, calling the encounter a sign of humility. In New York, a music collective performed the Blind Date Symphony, electronic instruments woven with plasma, data transformed into sound. Online, millions shared images of Atlas as a silent storyteller, a wanderer that arrived, passed, and left behind more questions than answers. Atlas, as always, remained silent. It did not know it had become the center of civilization's gaze. It did not pause, did not send a message. It simply continued its lonely voyage into the cold expanse. But it was precisely this silence that made it a symbol, a mirror reflecting humanity's endless curiosity and hunger to know. By the end of March, the world returned to its familiar rhythms. Cities bustled, markets reopened, and people commuted as before. Yet in collective memory, Main Idea 9 left a scar of wonder. Humanity had lifted its eyes to the sky, not in fear this time, but in hope and anticipation. A generation would never forget that they were there when Atlas and Mars met, a cosmic blind date written in dust, orbits, and the dreams of humankind. By the end of 2025, Atlas had drifted far beyond Mars's familiar glow, slipping into a stretch of orbit where only the most powerful telescopes could still catch its faint trace. On data screens, it appeared as nothing more than a blurred streak, a weak flicker, before dissolving into the infinite black. For most people, Atlas had vanished. Yet paradoxically, in its very departure, its image and meaning became sharper than ever. No longer a dry dataset or a sterile scientific bulletin, it had become a mirror of existential reflection, forcing humanity to pause and reconsider its place in the cosmos. Let us look back. In less than 12 months, humankind had been swept through a cascade of events that once belonged only to the realm of science fiction. A nova, bursting alive, blazing like an ancient memory reborn, earthquakes and magnetic storms shaking the foundations of our electronic civilization, leaving scars across power grids, satellites, and collective memory. And finally, the encounter between Atlas and Mars, a blind date between an interstellar past and the future humanity longs to touch. Each of these, taken alone, could have defined a generation, but strung together, they formed a strange symphony, making us realize we are the first generation to witness nova, earthquakes, magnetic storms, and an interstellar visitor unfolding in real time. The prevailing emotion was neither panic nor jubilation, but contemplation and awe. Contemplation, because never before had we seen so clearly the fragility of the civilization we've built. A single sneeze from the sun could send the whole world reeling. Awe, because there exists a force beyond every plan, every technology of ours, silently determining the broader canvas of existence. Woven through those feelings were subtler, steadier notes: hope, curiosity, and an openness to uncertainty. Hope that from the ocean of data, we might learn to predict, to shield, perhaps even to live in harmony with the cosmos. Curiosity wondering how many more wanderers like Atlas drift out there, waiting to pass by unannounced, and openness to uncertainty, accepting that sometimes the universe offers no answer at all, and that, in its very ambiguity, lies the space for us to seek meaning. In the press, articles no longer spoke only of science but of philosophy. Philosophers named Atlas the silent witness, for it never spoke, never explained, yet by its fleeting presence alone, it shook the way we perceive the world. Artists painted its orbit as a fine scar across the night sky, comparing it to a hyphen connecting what has been with what has yet to come. Teachers told their students 2025 was not just another year in history. It was the year the sky spoke. Hopi plain. What remains, after all, is not the economic losses or plasma charts, but the collective memory. A year in which every person from the scientist in NASA's control room to the child holding a cheap telescope in a backyard lifted their eyes to the same sky at the same time. A year when we learned that the vastness of the universe does not make us smaller, but rather sharpens our sense of connection to everything. Atlas has gone, but within humanity it remains like a whisper, reminding us that sometimes what the universe gives is not an answer, but an open question, vast enough to change the way we live. The silence of Atlas was its greatest paradox. Throughout its passage across the solar system, it sent no signals, delivered no message. It simply drifted, cold and indifferent, like millions of other celestial bodies scattered through the cosmos. And yet, it was this very silence that became the loudest declaration. It reminded humanity that the universe owes us no answers. It is not a finished book, but a manuscript forever in progress, and we have been handed the pen to write the next lines. At the year's end, at scientific conferences, the conversation extended far beyond data. One astrophysicist remarked, "Atlas said nothing, yet we heard everything." His meaning was clear. Through the nova, the magnetic storm, the trembling of the Earth, and the blind date with Mars, Atlas had composed a grammar of existence. Each event was a letter, each phenomenon a syllable, forming a sentence that spoke of our condition, that we, fragile beings, live in a universe where energy, chaos, and beauty move in tandem. The dominant emotions now were contemplation and awe, not the awe of ancient myth, where the cosmos was an omnipotent force before which humans bowed, but the awe of those willing to lift their heads and look truth in the eye, to accept that while we cannot control, we can understand. While we cannot define everything, we can connect. From that realization came gentler, enduring emotions, hope, curiosity, and openness to uncertainty. Hope that one day science will extend its reach, transforming today's mysteries into tomorrow's knowledge. Curiosity about visitors yet to arrive, secrets yet to open, an openness to uncertainty, because it is precisely the unknowing that drives us to create, to tell stories, to live. In everyday life, the Atlas events touched people in deeply personal ways. In a small village in Iceland, where the auroras from January's magnetic storm once tore the sky apart, locals erected a stone marker inscribed with the words, "We looked up together." In Tokyo, a group of students wrote a play called Atlas and Mars, imagining them as two characters in a cosmic love story. In Peru, where a teacher once told his class, "We are only temporary guests on this planet," children wrote letters to their friend Atlas, thanking it for stopping by to remind humanity that we are not alone. Philosophers called this the moment of harmony between science and spirit. Science had given us data, images, and numbers. Spirit transformed them into meaning, into stories, into collective memory. Without one side, the picture was incomplete. And the year 2025 proved, humans need knowledge to survive, but we also need stories to live with meaning. Atlas left behind no material legacy. It did not collide with a planet, it did not destroy, it did not construct, but it left behind a spiritual inheritance, a kind of collective existential memory. Humanity suddenly realized it could be bound together by something greater than borders, religions, or ideologies, by the sky itself. And when an entire generation lifts its eyes at the same moment, asking the same question, that too becomes history. As Atlas slowly faded from observation, new questions rose in its wake. What was the universe trying to say through that silence? How much had we truly understood, and how much remained forever beyond reach? It seemed that its absence spoke even louder than its presence. Atlas left behind no enduring material trace, yet it carved a spiritual imprint into the memory of an entire planet. People began to look back at 2025, not simply as a sequence of events, but as an existential pilgrimage. The Novae eruption, a reminder that the death of a star could ignite the birth of new light. The earthquakes and magnetic storms laying bare the fragility of systems once thought unshakable. Atlas and Mars, a fleeting encounter between two strangers in the cosmos, opening our imagination to future meetings yet to come. And when all of these were woven together, humanity realized something profound. We were the first generation to witness the universe, telling its story in many voices at once. The prevailing emotions were contemplation and awe. We contemplated our existence so small that a single burst of plasma could sweep us away, yet so vast that we could record, analyze, and draw meaning from the very same event. We felt awe before a universe at once indifferent and magnificent, where beauty and destruction often walked side by side, and from those deep currents arose subtler streams: hope, curiosity, and openness to uncertainty. Hope that the data gathered from Atlas might bring us closer to the origins of life. Curiosity about the next visitor, about whether a 4i was already on its way, and openness to uncertainty, accepting that we need not know everything in advance, but only dare to listen. One philosopher wrote, "Atlas reminds us that sometimes the universe does not answer with clarity, but with a silence so immense it forces us to change." The words were quoted thousands of times, spreading across platforms, becoming a compass for a new generation, one that grew up not only with the internet and smartphones, but with the memory of having once witnessed an interstellar visitor. At the community level, new movements began to take shape. Schools added the Year of Atlas into their curriculum, not as a pure astronomy lesson, but as a program linking science with philosophy, art, and the humanities. In many cities, people erected sculptures or painted murals of Atlas, not as objects of worship, but as reminders that there are moments when the entire world looks up together, transcending differences, to share in the silence of the sky. And in the final nights of the year, as the heavens returned to their familiar constellations, many still felt a lingering absence, an emptiness, yet not a sorrowful one. It was like the resonance that lingers after the last note of a symphony, where the audience remains still, listening to the echo of silence itself. That was the legacy Atlas left behind. A question without an answer, yet rich enough to deepen the way we live. Atlas was no longer in sight, but it lived on in memory, in art, in philosophy, in everyday conversations. It became a symbol of a simple yet profound truth. Humanity does not need every answer to live fully. Sometimes it is the not knowing itself that drives us to wonder, to create, and to continue the journey. And so, as 2025 closed, humanity stepped into the new year with a different spirit. Not blind fear, but awakened reverence. Not despair, but cautious hope. Not the pursuit of certainty, but the willingness to embrace uncertainty. Atlas had gone, but it left behind an invaluable gift: the ability to turn cosmic chaos into the language of meaning, and the ability to see ourselves reflected in the mirror of the sky.